The much discussed coaching draft. That's what we're doing today on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find the Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. A lot of year-end reflection posts coming from me. I was just working on one. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his great work over at RotoViz. Shawn, I was just working on one. We didn't have it necessarily a set time scheduled. We're getting into the offseason. Our cadence is going to shift up. We haven't talked in 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, we did the playoff team draft. We went for 2.5 hours. Hopefully that kept people engaged over the holidays and gave us a break for not recording last week. We had so much fun doing that. We decided we're going to do the other draft that we've been talking about that was requested of us, the head coach draft, because we talk about the
Carolina
coaching.
Panthers, baby, just like I said.
Yeah, Panthers made it. The Steelers made it. You also had me on that. The Ravens the Steelers did everything in their power to come back and blow that, losing to the Browns and everything else, but the Steelers won it. You got that one as well. You said that several weeks ago that the Steelers were going to run away with that division. They ran away with it by the hair on their chinny chin chin in week 18. But it's something we love to talk about on the Sunday night shows, the coaching stuff. It was sort of requested of us. We didn't have a time set for this, and I was working on a post, and we were texting, and you have been waiting on me for the last half hour. And just before we came on, we were just talking a little bit, and we decided to just hit record. We'll talk through this on the show, but because we were starting to talk about the coaches a little bit, I was sharing with you some stuff that I've been seeing on the coaching news front and on social. We have the coaching carousel this week, which is why this is such a fun topic. We'll talk about the coaches that we thought did a good job, the ones that we think were maybe unfairly maligned. I was talking to you about seeing a subset of Dolphins fans that can't fathom Mike McDaniel being brought back, because I think he did a good coaching job, and I couldn't get anything out of you. You had this poker face over there, and I realized that as I've been making you wait for the last 20 minutes as I work through this post that I've been working on and was late seeing your text, you said to me, you've been using this 20 minutes well, and all you gave me was that Mike McDaniel's in your top 20. So you have a ranked list. I come into this, Shawn, blind. I know who my top pick is, and that's about it. We talked about it recently, and I went through the teams, and I kind of made a loose group in my head at that time of who I think are the best coaches, but that was a month ago or more. You've got a list over here. I'm about to get dominated in this coaching draft. But how are you doing? How are the holidays? How's everything?
Good.
You're like,
seemed like you had one more word there. I didn't want to step on the last word.
I did, but I couldn't figure out what it was.
Fantastic. And hopefully all of the listeners did as well. Ben, you and I were able to sneak a team into 52nd, I believe, unless there have been any stat corrections that I haven't noticed that knocked us down a spot, or, you could always go up, I guess. 52nd, that was pretty exciting considering just everything that happened. We had another team finish in the money that was originally a J.K. Dobbins, Cam Scatterbo team. It ended up being basically zero running back team from the perspective of scoring any points. Kyle Monangai, we alternated some very low scoring folks into the last spot. Although that team would have finished in the top 100, I believe, if we had simply left Devin Singletary in there the last week. Fun to do a bunch of those with you. Fun to have some interesting results. But I have to say that the most fun I've had football-wise in the last month was with our Super Bowl draft that we did. I'm excited for this one, right? We have a lot of controversial stuff with the coaches. And as you're thinking about coaches, one of the things that we discussed even just for a moment here before the show is that a lot of the coaches are in situations that are either good enough that it's going to be a little bit difficult to evaluate them because they're surrounded with so much talent and just such a strong overall organization, that the organization doesn't make that many mistakes and is going to give you a pretty high floor. And then there are these situations, and probably the coach that I'm most surprised. I mean, you mentioned the Mike McDaniel thing. At least as we record, it seems like Zach Taylor is going to keep his job, which that's the one that seems unfathomable.
Crazy.
And yet, at the same time, the Bengals are not a serious organization from top to bottom. And he has taken them to the Super Bowl. Right? So we're talking about people who deserve to be fired. Someone who took a team to the Super Bowl for an organization that is not remotely serious. Just again, top to bottom. I mean, maybe maybe it's not as clear-cut a firing as it seems, but man, the last several years and so many different things have been rough there. But when we talk about coaches and we talk about doing this draft, one of the things that we have to consider in the same way that franchises have to consider is what are you looking for in a head coach, right? If you're doing a head coaching draft, you can also think of it from the perspective of if you just had all of the coaches out there and you had a chance to go through, do interviews and hire anyone you wanted. What order would you do that in? And some of the things then that you would have to decide for yourself are things like if you want an offensive or defensive mind, or if that doesn't really matter. You think the overall pitch, the overall quality of the head coach really swamps this sort of offensive versus defensive mindset. You have to decide for yourself whether you want a leader or whether you want a tactician. Not that those things are completely mutually exclusive, but we certainly have a lot of examples of coaches who have thrived because their X's and O's are otherworldly. And then we have coaches like Mike Tomlin who have thrived because the leadership abilities in an environment where leadership is going to be tough, right? Where the leadership abilities are off the charts. Now, which portions of it do you value the most in a head coach? And then you might also be asking yourselves some secondary questions about what do we want our identity to be? Do we even want to have an identity? Is it better to simply go out and say we want to do every single little thing as well as we possibly can? In a way, that's an identity too, right? But what is it that we're going to be emphasizing here? If we're starting from scratch, what are we going to want to build first? How do we get there? And how do we get there as quickly as possible? Then we haven't really discussed the exact parameters of what we're going to be looking for here, because one of the things that does make it a little bit tough is that if we were going to do a head coaching draft where we're starting today with an expansion team, you probably wouldn't select Andy Reid, but that also doesn't give you a clear cut view of where you think Andy Reid is as a coach. So I'm going to float to you the idea that the NFL, for whatever reason, gets completely shuffled. The players get spread out fairly evenly. All of the coaches are free agents. And our goal is to win a championship in the next 3 seasons to give some of these older guys a bit of a chance.
And then it's a reshuffle after that. Nothing after that matters.
Yeah. We're going to try and win here in 3 years. Does that work to kind of balance the playing field as we go through?
Yeah. When we talked about it originally, I think we were talking about it just loosely from the perspective of building a franchise going forward. And that's when I was telling you how old Andy Reid is. Cause I was like, I would not want to start with a guy who's 67 and looks like he may be on the downslope. I think that's a very smart parameter. I'm typing some notes as you're talking, doing a little bit of like show preparation during the recording. Cause that's how I roll. And I had a note, we set some parameters. So we're on the same page. And I wrote, what are we looking for if you're looking for starting a franchise? I like what you did there. My other question for you was going to be, can we draft non-current head coaches? And I think yes.
I've got some of those guys in the mix, yeah.
Okay, you do. I don't have enough like readily on my mind of like who the best candidates are and stuff, but I do have a couple that I think are interesting to discuss. As I worked through it, I was talking about Mike McDaniel. You had said, somewhere in your top 20. I think it's he's a fascinating one as I worked through just now typing up my own little like list to have some type of anchoring, just went team by team. There's a lot of good coaches. This is a really fun exercise. I think there's a clear top tier, and then I think there's a big middle group. And I was thinking about this. I was like, man, I don't know how I'm going to actually work through these middle ranges as we go, but I know that whoever falls to like 20th because you had said, you have the top 20. I think roughly that's what I have. Whoever falls to 20th, that team's fans are going to be mad. I did hear about like from the Eagles fans. Some of them were like, no, kind of agree with you. Some of them were like, you're way too low on the Eagles when we did our Super Bowl draft. And probably we were, but the point was that there was,
and then they went out and threw away the number 2 seed. So like how low can we really be?
But the main argument I think is, or point that I would want to make there is that there was a big middle tier in that draft, and somebody when you do a a draft and you do a ranked list, somebody gets pushed to the bottom of that tier. If we're doing an auction or looking at, the reason we did a draft is because the betting odds are very flat in that range. If we were doing some type of, betting odds related thing, it's going to be flat. The Eagles, where we drafted them, were not that dissimilar from the teams we were drafting in the top 5 at the, the back end of the top 5, even in the front end of the top 5. I mean, that was the point. Very similar dynamic with the current coaches. I think there are some that have to go early, and I'm curious where you will go and where I will go in those things. And then there's going to be a lot of directions you can go with it. So I love the parameters you set. We probably won't do 32. There's a bunch of coaches that have been fired. There's a bunch of coaches that are just irrelevant. You brought up Zach Taylor. So we're recording this Tuesday morning. Cliff Kingsbury was just let go a little bit ago. I had a little social media post. I was looking up some data, and the Commanders were 12th in yards per play this year. They didn't run a ton of plays. They didn't get the ball a lot because their defense couldn't get off the field. Their defense was 29th in yards per play allowed. That's not the only thing that matters, but Kingsbury being let go so Dan Quinn could keep his job when the Commanders defense has been horrible the last 2 years. And you can say, okay, personnel, but the Commanders offense has terrible personnel. They basically just built an entirely old offense that McLaurin was hurt all year. Debo's a shadow of himself. Eckler got hurt early this year. Zach Ertz had to be a huge part of the offense the last couple of years and then got hurt at the end of this season. And then Jane Daniels got hurt. And you're 12th in yards per play in a year where your star quarterback gets hurt, coming off a year where the offense was the reason you went to the conference championship game, and your defensive-minded head coach is going to keep his job. They're going to let the OC go. Very similar to what the Bengals did. The reason I bring this up is you just were talking about Zach Taylor. Lou Anarumo is a head coaching candidate that is being floated around. Lou Anarumo, a couple of years ago, was somehow the scapegoat for the Bengals and fired as the defensive coordinator. Their defense has plummeted to the bottom of the ranks since then, just a few years earlier with not a great personnel situation. You were talking about how different coaches have different personnel situations. Anarumo was able to build some game plans that beat the Chiefs in the postseason, right? Beat some good teams in some huge games, largely due to these defensive game plans. Yeah, they did great stuff on offense. Yeah, Joe Burrow's great, all those things. But, I mean, I don't think how poor the teams have done in the early part of the season under Zach Taylor, all of these elements, somehow Zach Taylor is still keeping his job, despite the fact that this team did not get better even after getting rid of Lou Anarumo, who was the scapegoat 2 years ago when Zach Taylor should have been fired the first time. But this is where we're at. We still have Zach Taylor. Apparently, Burrow and Chase and Higgins all really like him. It doesn't matter. If you're the owner, you have to make a decision that's best for your team. I understand that your players like him. Put them in a better situation to succeed. It's not just their opinion that matters. At any rate, I think the Lou Anarumo path since then is interesting. It gets to this point of isolating coaching from personnel, as you were talking about, situation. We're going to try to isolate all that stuff and talk about all that stuff. I think it's very relevant. I think it's very interesting. I've been seeing a lot of really, really interesting conversations. Again, I mentioned the Mike McDaniel thing. They finished 7-10. Tua Tagovailoa has a really rough season. They start really slow. People wanted Mike McDaniel fired preseason. After they started slow, people were saying he was going to be the first coach fired. He actually turns around a bad roster, develops a really strong running game, does all the things that a completely different offense than was good a few years ago. Without Tyreek Hill, it was not the same type of deep middle passing offense. It was more of a run-based, an explosive run-based offense. Not a great offensive line, no real passing threat, and yet still able to go win a bunch of games and go 7-10 with a pretty undermanned roster that got their GM fired, I think rightfully so. I think the Dolphins have done that right. They've identified where the real issue was and have kept the coach that I think did more with less than he gets credit for. I also saw Shane Steichen was close to being let go. People wanted that to go. Apparently, new owner, I can't remember her name. I think it's Carly Ursay, and then I think there's a hyphen there. Jim Ursay's daughter maybe wanted to clean house so that she could go her own direction, build her own direction. But I think the Shane Steichen thing is fascinating as well. He's been a good coach by my perception. I think he's in that big group. We'll see where he gets drafted. But this is a guy that I thought was successful with Daniel Jones and then was so good in the first half that we're going to talk about them as a collapse team. They weren't expected to win the number 1 seed. And the whole conversation about the Colts was, well, they collapsed. I mean, they collapsed. Their quarterback tore his Achilles, and they had a tougher schedule in the second half. You get penalized for doing so well in the first half of the season that you exceed expectations, and then you're not able to live up to that in the second half, and that's reason that we have to have tweets from national reporters saying the Colts are going to keep Shane Steichen? How is that even a discussion?
Yeah, I think he's probably in the top 10. I guess I'm a little bit more skeptical of Mike McDaniel, in part because
I did move him down quite a bit as I worked through this.
Because, I mean, there's a lot of culpability with him and the Tua contract. And I don't think that you can tank these last couple of games. I think it's pretty shady to put what's happened this season on Tua. And that part for me feels a lot like the Lou Anarumo thing. Now, Tua may only have been a thing in the first place because you're such a great coaching mind. But you have to have some accountability on the front office side from the perspective of, yeah, you're not in a position to make all of these personnel decisions the way some coaches are, but the input that you have has to be more productive from the perspective of building a team. I mean, Mike McDaniel goes out and out-schemes the opponent almost every week and is frustrated that he has to do it so dramatically because the Dolphins are so undermanned. Maybe in his boots, you really would like to get fired so you can go coach a team that is more talented. But at the same time, the personnel mistakes that you have contributed to are a big part of the problem. And the reality is simply that coaches do have a role in personnel acquisition. For some coaches, they're basically the GM. For some coaches, they really have to live with a lot of what their GM does. In either case, the input you have has to be productive. You can't be in a panic situation where you're like, I've accomplished these things with Tua, and I want to stick with that. And now we're going to retain him, only to, as our overall roster continues to hollow out, come back not that long later and not just say, okay, the contract was a little bit of a mistake. It was too much money. We could have gone a different route. But put the team in a situation where you're benching him, scapegoating him. And now, I mean, you've contributed to like a New Orleans Saints type of dynamic where the team is really pretty much in purgatory forever. And at least in small part, because you were so infatuated with what you were able to accomplish with him in the first place.
I wound up moving him down a moment ago, and you say the Saints thing. I have him right next to the other Saints coach. I'm giving you little tidbits of information because I know you're over there getting all the information you can. You can't do a draft without your value hat on. The counterpoint on Mike McDaniel would be Tua dug his own grave with the press conferences early in the year. He was bad. I've never seen a quarterback be such a bad leader in press conferences as he was as they were going through turmoil. Just going up there every week and like throwing people under the bus. It was rough for a couple weeks there.
Well, I mean, again, it's the same kind of thing that McDaniel is dealing with, where the GM has done such a poor job with this team that you have both, I mean, you have almost no talent, and then you have unreliable malcontents, and you've had to deal with the Tyreek Hill thing. I mean, both of these guys are just like, put us in a situation that is neutral and we'll succeed. This situation is not neutral, and they want people to know. And yet that, like you're saying, that only in the end shows them in a less favorable light as well.
I totally agree. I think the only thing I would say is you kind of said throwing Tua under the bus. I would say that Tua worked his way under the bus on his own. And at some point, McDaniel had to work through that and then be like, look, I'm excited to move on from what I've had to deal with, because he was throwing McDaniel under the bus too at times. Maybe I overstated that a little bit. My recollection of that was it was pretty rough. Let's get to the draft, because we are 20 minutes in. There's so much fun stuff to talk about here. You had the first pick in the other draft. I'm going to just nominate myself to be the first pick in this one. You got an issue with that?
No.
All right. Because I want to make the first pick anyway. There's the next topic I want to talk about is the guy I'm going to take first. I'm going to take Mike McDonald first. And I think Mike McDonald did the best coaching job in the NFL this year. I don't know that he's the best coach. I think so. The next topic I want to talk about is I tweeted about Coach of the Year, and Mike Vrabel is the huge favorite for Coach of the Year right now. And it's kind of shocking to me. The only argument for Mike Vrabel as Coach of the Year is a turnaround in wins. They had 4 wins last year. They went to 14. But even that part of it, you talked about the situation coming into the year because the Patriots had such an easier schedule. Their win total was actually higher than Seattle's. I tweeted that they both had 8.5 win totals. I had somebody who would know mentioned to me that Seattle was actually had moved down to 7.5. I think in some places there's always like juice one way or the other, but there were more people taking the over on the Patriots there. And I was one of the people, whenever I talk about the Seahawks, I always get the homer thing. I'm a huge Huskies fan. I'm a huge Seattle Mariners fan. People know I'm from Seattle. I've never been a Seattle Seahawks fan. We've talked about it on the show that I do track them because everyone in my close orbit is Seahawks fans, but I was very out on the Seahawks offseason. I thought they did a terrible job. I thought they were trying to fit talent to scheme instead of scheme to talent. They went out and acquired Darnold, went out and acquired Cooper Kupp. I called them the I know better team of the offseason because those are two guys that their former teams did not want, and they went out and proactively got. And there were sharp teams. The Vikings, Kevin O'Connell did not want Darnold anymore. I mean, pretty clearly, the Rams and Sean McVay did not want Cooper Kupp anymore. They paid him a bunch of money to bring him in. They brought in Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who's never been good, but had a little bit of a stretch under Clint Kubiak last year with the Saints. So they brought him into the offseason. He has not had an impact. Kupp has not really had an impact. Darnold's impact, frankly, questionable. Vrabel's been working with a way better quarterback, in my opinion. And they didn't get the 1 seed. Same record. McDonald goes 14-3 in a tougher division, massively better point differential. The Seahawks have the best point differential in football, nearly plus 200. All 3 of their losses by 4 points or fewer. One of them against the Bucs came in a game they led late. The Bucs tied with a touchdown. Darnold had a chance to get them in a field goal range and win the game, and immediately throws a pick into double coverage that, while they're on their own side of the field, that just gives the Bucs the game-winning field goal range in a tie game. I mean, you're asking a quarterback to go get you that field goal there. That's not a coaching situation. That is this is what I'm dealing with situation. That's one of their 3 losses of the year. That was against the Bucs. They also had a tough loss against the Niners late, where Brock Purdy made that weird extended play pass to Tonjes, but it was another game they probably should have won. They basically led in every game all year, early or the first half of the year. The most dominant coaching job of the season, I think, bar none. This is not a team that people expected to be the number 1 seed. People are talking about their record last year. What was their expectations coming in? Because they had an overhaul. They have a new quarterback. They have a new coordinator. Things shifted. People are like, well, they weren't a 4-win team like the Patriots. That's based on what their schedule was and everything as well. The forward-looking win-loss stuff was more negative on the Seahawks. Again, this is not a podcast about coach of the year, but Mike McDonald did an incredible coaching job. And the part of this that I want to emphasize is his team was good because they're both defensive coaches because of his defense. He's at the forefront of the schematic innovation of this league, and I think that's the part of why I'm making him the first pick in this draft. There's so much evolution in the sport, era to era, period to period. We're always talking about it. What is the new meta? What do you want for your coach for the next 3 years, et cetera? What I think Mike McDonald did this offseason, and John Schneider gets a lot of credit for a lot of the organizational stuff. I do think Schneider's a good GM broadly. I have a really hard time imagining that Mike McDonald didn't have a ton of say after 1 year as the new head coach in removing his offensive coordinator, in who they picked, in removing his QB, in who they picked. And those are the decisions that people are giving Schneider credit for bringing in Clint Kubiak, for bringing in Darnold. I had somebody respond to me on the Coach of the Year thing. They went and got a 14-win quarterback, and there's that stat floating that Sam Darnold's now the only quarterback, since I think, other than Tom Brady, to have back-to-back 14-win seasons. It's the most, in my opinion, sort of useless stat. Like, yes, Sam Darnold's won a lot of games the last 2 years. There's context. There's always context in football. At any rate, Mike McDonald, I think, did an incredible coaching job. I think he knew what he wanted to do in the offseason. He took a huge risk in firing an offensive coordinator that wasn't terrible last year. Their offense wasn't terrible and only had 1 year, but he was like, look, schematically, this doesn't work. I need to go a different direction with scheme. I need to understand different things. They went and drafted Nicky Manwari. Again, Schneider's the GM. I do think that had a lot to do with Mike McDonald as well, because of the way they've used him scheme-wise, because of how they've been able to match the 13 personnel stuff with nickel, right? Like they're the team that is schematically, that is doing these things, that is answering what the offenses are trying to pivot to. They're doing it offensively. They're doing the heavy tight end stuff. The Seahawks offensively, they hired the coordinator intentionally for that. They built a scheme intentionally to run a bunch and mitigate their quarterback, even though they're not even necessarily a great running team. Keep him in obvious passing situations. Don't ask him to throw in non-obvious spots. They do stuff that I would not want an average team to do. Like on 3rd and long, they'll sometimes run and punt and play field position. But I think with what they have, that's sort of the way they've had to play. I think the entire thing is understanding what works in the modern NFL, both offensively and defensively. I think even if Kubiak gets a head coaching job, which I assume he probably will, just based on what types of schemes teams are trying to hire for and who's trying to acquire who, I do think McDonald's going to be able to find somebody else to essentially do this. I think what we're going to find out from Mike McDonald over the next 10 years is he's going to be able to go through underlings and still be successful, a lot like Bill Belichick did for a really long time. I would prioritize an offensive-minded head coach. I think Mike McDonald is the perfect head coach from the perspective that he understands all of it, the scheme and all of those things, and can delegate, it seems, and understands what he needs underneath him. Again, the firing of Grubb and the bringing in of Clint Kubiak and the way they made this roster into there's no question he had the best coaching performance in a year that had a ton of great coaching performances. To me, I actually think it's clear. And I use the word clear, and people are like, you can't say it's clear. You can't say he did a clearly better coaching job than Vrabel or Ben Johnson or Liam Cohen or all these guys that did awesome coaching jobs this year. Mike McDonald is in a copycat league going to be the guy that gets copied the most this offseason. He's ahead of it. And I think he did the best coaching job by a lot this year. And he's the guy I'd want to be my coach of this random team for the next 3 years.
I like that. I had McDonald number 1 as well. I don't have him gapped from basically the rest of the crowd at the top. And in part because I do think a lot of the success that they've had has been a little bit fluky and outside of the things that he's done well. So the moving him up to number 1 for me would have been based on just how utterly dominant their defense was against the 49ers, right? Because if you're going to be the defensive mind, if you're going to have a defensive identity, then when you have a team that's doing what the 49ers were doing, come in with the number 1 seed on the line and you embarrass them and hold them to 3 points, then you have come through with your side of it and said, I mean, this is everything, right? And we for the regular season perspective, this is a complete and total mission accomplished. The tricky part here, and I think the fun part, right, is projecting forward with these coaches who haven't really accomplished anything yet, because we're going to be tempted to, and probably mostly will, take some young masterminds who appear on the doorstep of great things ahead of some slightly more established, more leadership-based coaches who have already done it, but maybe didn't do it this past year. And I mean, you could think about teams that dominated the regular season, like the Bills and the Ravens, who, like right now, we're not impressed with their coaches at all because they continually were unmasked by the Chiefs in the playoffs. They obviously won't run into that this season, but they're going to run into some other things potentially. And just their stars have fallen to the point where they don't look like the team's ready to take advantage of it this year. My concern with the Seahawks team is that so much of what really happened is that they treaded water offensively and were not able to unlock the running game in a way that really accomplished their objectives. But they had a receiver take a leap from being solid to being, I mean, Jackson Smith-Njigba had one of the greatest wide receiver seasons of all time. And some of that definitely goes to the coordinator, and certainly is one of the reasons why you would expect Kubiak to get a head job this coming year, in the same way that people like Kellen Moore, like Liam Cohen, when you saw what they did as coordinators and then you saw what they did as first-year coaches this year, you're like, yeah, let's try and follow that template when we're doing the next wave of hiring, because JSN doesn't get there by himself. But if he doesn't do what he did this year, the offense is going to be a catastrophe. And even doing what he did, it took an incredibly fluky series of special teams plays and 2-point conversions to defeat the Rams in the rematch at home after Darnold was embarrassed the first time. The Darnold thing is still a huge problem, right? People can talk about 14 wins all they want. It's like, well, you played in 2 of the best possible situations maybe in NFL. Kevin O'Connell is not too far down my board by any stretch. And so the sustainability of a team that has this as their offensive philosophy, I think is still pretty problematic. And it'll be interesting to track it, because what he's done defensively in the raw scoring that they've put up this season with Sam Darnold certainly validates everything that McDonald has wanted to do this offseason. But I'm going to take Ben Johnson number 2. And
also my number 2. You said you had my number 1 ranked 1. I had him ranked 2.
And I was a little bit skeptical of some of these elements, given the big splits last season in the Lions' point per drive with and without David Montgomery. I mean, one of the easy things you can do when David Montgomery is healthy is just give him the ball a little bit less and score more points. But he came in, and you can immediately see the vision. He comes in, they select Colston Loveland, they select Luther Burden. Those guys, especially Loveland, but both of those guys look like they will be the foundation of the offense going forward, not the incumbents who appeared strong enough at the point of the draft that you're like, why are they putting even more resources into this side? But similar to the situation with McDonald, you want to see an offensive-minded head coach come out and put together an offense that is scary. Then you run into all of these hurdles where Caleb Williams continues to throw some of the least accurate passes in the NFL. You have a pretty mediocre running back talent on your team. You have injuries in the secondary, and you have a poor defense. You have a situation with Caleb Williams in his second year that is somewhat akin to the situation with Bo Nix in Denver, where it seems like the fourth quarter is the only quarter that he's willing to actually go out there and play, maybe in part because that's when the gunslinger element really can, rise to the surface, come to fruition, and be something where we're just going to relax and play sandlot football, and that's fine. Some of the quotes that the coverage had of Bo Nix with Sean Payton, where Payton was saying, in these big moments, I'm going to call a timeout, and Drew Brees is going to execute the plan. In the big moments now, we're just going to go with it, and Nix is going to freelance something, and it's going to work. And it's interesting because, Sean Payton is not only saying, Bo Nix is not Drew Brees, but underlining that you have to treat players differently, that players have different strengths, that type of thing. The Bears get this criticism of having the fourth quarter miracles. But Ben, when we think about football in 2025 and what it comes down to, so much of it really is with the limited number of possessions, with the field position that teams have, with the difficulty of really throwing the ball effectively to score. Tactics are incredibly important, and in-game decisions are paramount. A lot of what happened with the Bears this season is lucky, but a lot of it is that Ben Johnson is simply better than other coaches across the board. And this ability to put together better gimmick plays, to put together a better vanilla scheme, to put together a better approach to the possessional things late, that's absolutely the most important thing that we're looking for from a current head coach. And I think that kind of separates him in some ways already. Now, again, with the same situation with Mike McDonald, he's got a ton to prove. And I don't think he necessarily even needs to prove it in this year's playoffs, although I'm more optimistic about the Bears than most people. But I think that this ability is something that could potentially separate him from a Kyle Shanahan, can potentially separate him from a Sean McVay, and can make him the guy where 2 or 3 years from now, we're looking at a Chicago Bears offense that is also unstoppable, but similar to what McDonald was able to do this year with the Seahawks, where they're not his other side of the ball, not the side he is directly responsible for, is also dynamic. You're going to see this Bears defense rise up. You're going to see the Bears absolutely slaughtering teams and get to the point where Chicago is the scariest team in the NFL. Some of that is just projecting forward things that I think are going to happen. But you look at what he's done this season, even with a lot of obstacles, even going back to the point where the Chicago Bears throughout the preseason and even then as extended into the regular season had a hard time snapping the ball effectively. Now, you could argue that a lot of that has to go on your offensive-minded head coach, but the ability to work around those things, to get Caleb Williams to where he is now, to get Colston Loveland to where he's looking like, I mean, he could be one of these, borderline 1-2 turn tight ends, probably not next year, but in 2027. And unfortunately, even though Dan Campbell is certainly still one of my targets, you see some of the things that have happened on the Detroit side, and it brings to mind some of these things that have happened in Philadelphia, where when they lose their superstar assistants, it's difficult to maintain that same level of dynamism, that same level of execution, and the same kind of caliber of invincibility, right? I mean, you think about where the Detroit Lions were the last couple of years, where even with Jared Goff, they felt like the team that was going to put 50 on you and panic was going to set in early. I mean, they're not that team anymore, even as they defeat the Bears in week 18 and show that they still have a lot going for them as well.
I love this pick. I love some of the notes you had about the decisions we have to make in terms of the longer term stuff. I do want to say, sort of from a philosophical standpoint, my approach does come back to this thing that I always talk about on the show about the evolution of the sport. I think you want people who have answers for the modern game. There have been coaches that are so good that they've been able to be really strong coaches for a long time. But a lot of the coaches, if you look back historically, that were really good for stretches, weren't always able to maintain a really high end of coach. Like Mike Tomlin, for example, has been an incredible coach for a long time. I have him ranked highly in my preliminary list here. There are Steelers fans that want to get rid of him. They haven't won a playoff game in however many years and all of this stuff. The team they just played in week 18, John Harbaugh, same thing. Like there's a lot of people talking about, but those two teams potentially getting rid of those coaches, those longtime coaches that have done a lot of the right things from a culture standpoint and built winning programs year in and year out. But is the ceiling there? Do they have modern answers for the innovation of a sport? That my big point here would be is going through eras quicker now than it ever had. I've always argued these points about the sport evolving. I do think after 2020, really, the sport has been different. And we talked about how defenses changed their whole philosophy, and that great athletic podcast series, The Play Callers, that talked with all the coaches, and they confirmed this, that they were now changing the way that they were playing defense and less regulated and specifically trying to take away explosives in the pass game, where for basically the history of football, it was stop the run. And then the pass is just used to work off of the run. And now it's different. It's completely different. The rules have changed so much that offenses have gotten so good. Now it's, okay, we're playing defense differently. We're playing with more intent. We're going to do what we want to do, not match what you're doing every single time. We're going to try and take it to you. And offense has been down the last couple of years as a result. And we talked about when's the offensive counterpunch going to come, and there's all these little things that have changed. We got mobile quarterbacks that were really important. Then in 2025, mobile. I was just telling you a stat that is going to be in my next piece, but Josh Allen led all quarterbacks in rushing this year with, I think it was 579. It was the lowest leading yardage quarterback season since 2009. David Garrard. I mean, we just a few years ago had like 5 700-yard rushing quarterbacks. Last year we had 2 right around 900, Lamar Jackson and Jane Daniels. You do get injuries, but you also get the league chewing up and spitting out Kyler Murray and Justin Fields and some of these guys that could have been big rushing guys, because I just think everything is shifting constantly about what you need and how you need it and how you can get to it offensively and defensively. And I think the game within the game with these really sharp coaches is evolving quicker because of the use of data, because of the use of analytics, because of the information game, the 13 personnel stuff. And then, how do we match that and all that? And you have people analyzing the game as outsiders that don't know the game plans at a higher level than ever before and can call things out within seasons. And that's getting back into the game. You have smarter beat writers that are asking smarter questions and putting it on the coach's lap in losses. Why didn't you respond to these things this way? Because that's what I'm reading on Twitter, that, all the smart fantasy analysts or real football analysts are saying. I mean, you get those questions asked directly to the coaches now in 2025 and 2026. And I do think you have to have the ability to innovate and be modern. again, some of these coaches that were great coaches, Andy Reid comes up. He was great for the Eagles. He had to move on to the Chiefs, and he was great for the Chiefs. Another Chief that you have to talk about, Dick Vermeil, did the same thing. Great with the Rams, moved on to the Chiefs, was able to build a juggernaut offense with the Chiefs. There are some coaches that can do that, but a lot of the coaches historically that are really strong at one point and they go somewhere else are not necessarily able to reach the same peak. And you do see historically the younger ones, a lot like in fantasy football, the younger players we love to see hit these real ceilings. The young head coaches have the ability, because the question is, how do you solve tomorrow's problem? Like the answers that Bill Belichick had 20 years ago and Andy Reid had 10 years ago are not the same. They're not solving the same problems in 2026. And so anyway, I think all of that is something to keep in mind as we go through this. That's why I agree with you on Ben Johnson. I think he was a great selection for the second coach on this one. Having said all of that, I am going to take a coach that has coached for a while with the next pick. And I didn't think I was going to when I just made a preliminary point or list, but the one I'm going to go with is Sean McVay here. And I decided that sort of even before you mentioned him and what you were talking about, but McVay has gone through different iterations offensively. One of the things I love about what he's been able to do as a coach over several seasons is get a lot of production out of less heralded draft picks. And they do a lot of things differently with the way they scout. They don't go to the combine famously and all that stuff. And some of that probably has to do with Les Snead, the GM, more so than McVay. But I know McVay's involved in that a lot. There's been a lot of the stuff from the draft and the draft room where there's been reports that have come out where like McVay wanted certain guys. I think he was really high on Puka Nacua, for example, as a day 3 guy. Really thought they could bring certain things out of his skill set with the blocking and the receiving.
I can think of as you're talking about that is Jarquez Hunter.
Jarquez Hunter, obviously a great example, but even Blake Corum, Sean. I mean, I don't know, but Kyron Williams was the other one that was coming to mind. Even what they've been able to do with the tight ends, the different tight ends, where they get production from. Obviously, having Matthew Stafford helps, but where they get production from. This is a team that in the preseason people thought might completely implode again this year. Matthew Stafford's back, all these things. Devontae Adams, I think we both agree, is a shadow of his former self, and yet he was able to get real production out of him and a real role out of him, and I think a smart role out of him. Even as annoying as it was to see him catch all the short touchdowns, like that's what Devontae Adams is so good at. He made a lot of those short touchdowns easy because he is still good in space at route running and creating separation. He just probably doesn't have the long speed in those things as much. But what they were able to do offensively this year, some of the answers defensively, I mean, I totally agree with you on evaluating these coaches based on their side of the ball more than the other. But I think there are certain coaches that we can infer are having an impact on the opposite side of the ball. I think, again, to get back to the Bill Belichick analogy that I had with Mike McDonald, that's what Belichick did over his course of his career. They went through a ton of different offensive coordinators, but it was the scheme, the depth of scheme knowledge, the football knowledge that allowed him to innovate 2 new challenges throughout the 20 years as a Patriots coach. They did the 11 personnel before it was popular. They had the pass catching back, like the Kevin Falk and everything, and what they did with Randy Moss and Wes Welker. And then a few years later, they're doing 2 tight ends years before that was popular with Gronkowski and Hernandez, and reinventing the offense. That 11 personnel was a shotgun heavy passing game before shotgun was super popular. Those types of schematic things that you can find answers to whatever the problem of the day is, I think is one of the biggest things you need to look for in a coach, because you have to be able to innovate, not just in an off season, but within seasons, right? You have to be able to self-scout. You have to be able to understand new answers to different problems as they come up. Sean McVay has shown an ability to do that over a lot of years, get a lot of production from a lot of different guys, and do it in different ways. And I think that's the biggest reason. Still a very young coach, but has shown an ability to win over multiple eras. He won with Jared Goff and got all the way to the Super Bowl. Then they had some issues. He goes and gets Stafford. They win a Super Bowl, and now they're in position to potentially go to another Super Bowl. They are one of the 2 favorites. I think he's done an incredible coaching job over different eras of rosters. Those first 2 teams had Aaron Donald, for example. He no longer has Aaron Donald on the defensive side of the ball. It helps to have Jared Verse and some of the other guys they have, but I think McVay has shown an ability to elevate players, to understand a lot of the answers that teams are looking for and how to have his own answers schematically. Those are the kinds of things that I like to look at. You talked about it with Ben Johnson. I think he was a great second pick as well. But that gives McVay the slight edge for me here. The other minor thing I wanted to address before I kick it back to you, I was saying I think Mike McDonald was the clear coach of the year this year. I did get a reply on Twitter that Vrabel shouldn't even be the second guy. Ben Johnson should be, and I agreed with that. I just think when you then look at the results of the Bears and the Seahawks and how much more dominant the Seahawks were, but Ben Johnson turning Caleb Williams, you don't get much offseason practice time. in August, he was talking about, hey, we wanted to get him under center because we want to pair, and that's been a big scheme thing. We want to pair the run game with the pass game. The under center stuff has become very popular again in 2025, and Caleb Williams hadn't done it since like high school. All this stuff about the quarterbacks not developing the same way, and the high school and college system is not developing quarterbacks to play modern NFL quarterback anymore. I think that stuff's going to get fixed over time because we have new challenges always, and that's the new challenge right now in 2025. But Caleb Williams is one of those quarterbacks who came through a lot of systems that were very shotgun heavy, and then Ben Johnson wanted him under center and didn't have enough practice time in the offseason to really get there, and talked about that right before week 1. And I was like, man, this could be a disaster because they're trying to just go back to the shotgun. In the last preseason game, it was all shotgun heavy. I remember writing preseason stealing signals and being like, oh, I guess they abandoned that because they have to have an answer for week 1. And yet he continued to evolve in season, and they do a lot of under center now. He kept working with Caleb Williams. Where the Bears are at now compared to where they were in September, incredible coaching job from Ben Johnson. Just wanted to note that. And I do think he should be essentially the runner-up, another one of the big coaches of the year. But I also agree with your point that there was not a gap. I wasn't trying to say that. I think there's a clear top tier, and there's some more guys in it. McDonald, to me, was the top pick. I don't think he was gapping everyone else by any means. I don't know that you necessarily said that.
Well, no, I have separate takes on the coach of the year versus this draft. I think for coach of the year, McDonald does actually have everybody gapped.
Right.
And I think that Sean McVay would be my runner-up selection. I mean, you're talking about a team that finished first in yards, first in points. Matthew Stafford as a legitimate MVP candidate at age 37. Puka Nacua having one of the greatest receiving seasons ever. And despite being just 12-5, the difficulty of playing in the NFC West versus what the Patriots had to navigate this season, I don't think those things are remotely competitive. I would be fine going with McVay as the coach of the year and Drake May as the MVP, in part because Mays seemed more just purely on the QB talent, which is the most valuable part. Whereas Stafford, despite still having the arm and the flair, McVay clearly the driver of so much that the second season, I should say, with Stafford there as the QB when he is younger, although the health has always been an issue for Stafford. They went 5-12. I had McVay as number 3 on my list as well. And it's tricky because I think there's an argument to like have him clearly first when you're talking about somebody who has been to 2 Super Bowls already as a young coach, won one, and also probably did the best job of coaching in the NFL this year outside of maybe the compatriot in Seattle. At the same time, I think I might have passed on him as the draft was live, because the other kind of weird thing here is I do think that the myth around McVay, because of the 2 Super Bowls, and again, the Super Bowls, I mean, that's what you're trying to do, right? You're not like, oh, can we be in the top 10 consistently and be fine? You want to win. You want to get there. You want to win. The Rams have been outside the top 20 in points in 3 of the last 6 seasons. Their defensive rankings have been consistently bad while he's been the head coach. And the one year they were good was the year the offense was terrible. Right. And so and I also have a little bit of an issue with the Goff thing where, especially now with what Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson have been able to do with Goff, there does feel like there's a little bit of scapegoating, which is always something that I think bothers us. Right. When a coach is now, if you can go from Goff to Matthew Stafford, I mean, that's clearly what you want to do. But
how many playoff games have Dan Campbell and the staff in Detroit won with Jared Goff? It's 0.
They haven't been unstoppable.
No, they've done some good things with them. No, I think you make a great point. So who's your pick?
So I'm going to go with Dan Campbell here. Okay. Because one of the things I think it's easy to do is get really caught up in the season that just happened. And even if you get caught up in the season that just happened, I mean, you can have Dan Campbell fairly high, but it is interesting in a season where you lose Sam Laporta, where you have some issues on the offensive line, where you very visibly lose Ben Johnson, right? This is a team that finished with a higher ranking in points in 2025 than they did in 2022 or 2023, 2 seasons when Ben Johnson is there. One of the issues they had this year was just actually winning the close games, which again, I think does matter. And their defense remained poor. One of the reasons that they were so dominant last year and go 15-2 is that there was a big gap between yards and points on the defensive side. Some of that you can sustainably accomplish if you're a Bill Belichick. Some of it is obviously going to be fluky in most cases. But one of the things that I think gives Dan Campbell an advantage here over so many other coaches who are similar, right? This area at the top is tight and is fun, but he takes over an organization in complete and total disarray and is able to completely remake it in his image through a lot of different things, a lot of different elements of leadership. But I mean, he has taken over the mantle from guys like Mike Tomlin as the leader, right? The coach, where if you want this combination of players coach and leadership abilities, that Dan Campbell is going to be the guy who looms over everyone else. But the other thing about it is it's not just a team that's like, we're going to be okay in a lot of facets and we're going to be solid. And because we've got this great leader in charge, we're going to eke out victories. He's on the offensive side of things, and his offense has been utterly electric, and it has been so with Jared Goff. And granted, I mean, they've got a skill position talent galore, right? When you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, when he's probably not even the most dynamic receiver on the team, he's the best receiver on the team. But when you have Jamison Williams, who might be the fastest player in the NFL with the football, when you have Jahmyr Gibbs, who is the most dynamic running back in the NFL and one of the most dynamic running backs ever, I mean, you should score some points. But what they have done here in building out of the 3-13 season up to being solid in 2022, fantastic in 2023, the best team in football in 2024. And it was sad that you have the playoff meltdown, because that does change things a bit. If they win that game, then, I mean, Dan Campbell might be the guy that we're just like, even if they had a bad season this year because of some injuries and whatnot, you draft him number one. I think that the inability to develop the defense to go with it is a little bit Kansas City Chiefs for Emil-esque in the concerns, but they've also been ravaged by defensive injuries. And you even think to the best team that they had last season where they lose Aiden Hutchinson. I guess I would like to see these guys stay a little bit healthier and find out what we do. It certainly is disappointing when you lose Aaron Glenn and he both melts down with the Jets and your defense takes a step back. I mean, they're going to need to continue to build this out, and I think that they will. I mean, Dan Campbell's quotes and his personality don't give the impression he's going to be like, oh, well, I mean, we lost Ben Johnson, and he's having some success, and, we lost some close games, and we had some injuries, and, like, woe is me. It's like, bro, they're going to go out and try and be 15-2 next year, and in the same way that Sean McVay has had a few setbacks and has come off of them stronger, I think you would argue. I mean, this Lions team with Dan Campbell, and Dan Campbell himself, I think, has an incredibly exciting future as the head coach of the Detroit Lions.
I love it. I had him in the top tier as well. The counterpoint to and I only have 3 more names in my top tier, so he was a part of it. I had him a couple spots down. The counterpoint such that I would make one, we're talking about a coach taking over an average roster. You talked about the talent. They had a dominant offensive line every year until now. The offense did take a step back this year without the dominant offensive line. You took Ben Johnson very high. They did take a step back without Ben Johnson. I love, because context is always key. I love that you're taking Ben Johnson with your first pick and Dan Campbell with your second. And so much of like the social media discussion that I'm always like lamenting on here is like people will say either it was all Ben Johnson last year and before, or, whatever, it's got to be one or the other. And you're saying Ben Johnson is great with the Bears, and Dan Campbell is also still deserves a ton of credit for the things that he's done. And I do really like that. But the lack of they didn't have a ton of injuries this year offensively, and the fact that they did take a little bit of a step back just because of some offensive line issues, and then the lack of development of the defense that you talked about, I think are pretty key and interesting ones. They have not won a playoff game. As much as I completely agree with everything that you said, I got the 1 seed last year. They failed to make the playoffs this year, have not won.
Marty Schottenheimer would tell you can be the greatest regular season coach in football. It doesn't mean you're going to win in the playoffs.
That's right. Do I have that right? Did they win a playoff game the year prior? when they weren't the 1 seed. Maybe I'm lying. Oh, I am lying. They won 2 playoff games the year prior. I'm completely making that up. People from Detroit are yelling at their mics right now. In 2023, they beat the Rams by 1. They beat the Bucks, and then they lost in the conference championship to the 49ers by 3 points.
Then they had that game won, too.
Yeah. I don't know
they
why.
Should have been in the Super Bowl and defeated the Kansas City Chiefs.
Totally. The bomb that should have been intercepted from Purdy or whatever bounced off the defender's face mask, and Brandon Ayuk caught it down inside the 5-yard line. It was a huge play in that game. Even if it just went incomplete, it would have been massive. Sorry to Detroit fans. I apologize for saying they had not won. They've won 2 playoff games with Jared Goff. That was a lie. Anyway, it's been a couple of years, so I can only think about the last season. Obviously, I'm going to go next with a young coach that, I think you could have taken as high as 2. And I originally in my first list put right with Ben Johnson and had ahead of Sean McVay. And then I flipped that as I thought about it and take Liam Cohen, who I think has done an incredible job in Jacksonville. Look, I don't think Trevor Lawrence is suddenly a great quarterback. And I think it was a kind of a tall ask. But you look at what Baker Mayfield has run into problem-wise when he hasn't had Liam Cohen on the sideline with some answers. And you can say, yeah, he was good with Dave Canales the year prior too. You go look at Baker Mayfield's stats year over year. He was good a couple of years ago in the season that got Canales a head coaching job. Good enough to get Canales a head coaching job. And then under Liam Cohen, everything shot up. His completion percentage went up like 6 points. His pass TD rate went way up. And all of that is worse this year. And
he was so good that he was being taken as the rare pass-oriented QB, not in the Joe Burrow neighborhood, but they gapped up from all of the guys who actually dominated this season. And I thought that was wrong, and that did prove to be the case. And yet, chasing the season that he had and the idea that Baker Mayfield is actually good. It's again where both things can be true, right? Baker Mayfield can be a really good quarterback, and the peak season has a lot to do with, as you're talking about, Liam Cohen.
Right. I think it has a ton to do with it. And I think the fact that Mayfield ran into some problems this year, they ultimately missed the playoffs. They did win in week 17, but that should have been a more dominant win. They had to settle for a ton of field goals, even when they did get healthy, and they had a lot of injuries. They lost week 16 to Miami, which was, the loss that if you look back and you go, man, how did they lose week 16? They needed to win that game so they wouldn't be in the position they were in week 18, which was that they needed the Falcons to not become a part of a 3-way tie. They went into that game week 17 with the Dolphins, knowing they needed to win, and they were unable to beat Quinn Ewers. It's just bizarre. Trevor Lawrence. Now, the point obviously is also the Trevor Lawrence point, which is that this guy has taken a step forward. We talked about it for years on the show that he has never thrown more than 25 pass TDs. This year, he ends up throwing 29. Adds rushing yardage to his total as well. Has a career high in rushing yards and then 9 rushing TDs, which is way higher than his previous career high of 5. And that was part of their answer earlier in the season when he wasn't really getting the scheme clearly yet, that they would look for him to run more. He had multiple touchdown passes in just 2 games through, the first 11 games or 10 games, it looks like. Final 7 games, multiple TD passes in 6 of them. He's playing his best football coming down the stretch. He had 3+ passing TDs in 4 of those 7 games going into the postseason. It's part of the reason that we really liked Jacksonville, both you and I, when we did our Super Bowl draft a couple of weeks ago, that this is a team that is playing better football now than they were at the beginning of the season. Very similar to the Ben Johnson conversation we had about a team that came in and had to get a quarterback that has underperformed. For Ben Johnson, it was Caleb Williams, a former number 1 pick, and obviously Lawrence is as well, but only had 1 year under his belt, and I think was a little bit more of an open book. For Lawrence, you have some issues that have extended many years, and a lot of people that think Trevor Lawrence is, or thought, I should say, Trevor Lawrence is just not good, not good enough to win with. He's been able to develop some of that throughout this season in a way that you're getting the best football out of Trevor Lawrence at the right time in his first season there. I think it's an incredible coaching job that he's done this year, and he's another guy that we haven't talked about enough yet when we were talking about the coach of the year stuff. Some of the replies I got when I was saying it was Mike McDonald clearly as the coach of the year, and those things were that Cohen should be the answer to this question. And I don't think that's wrong. I think he's a part of the group that should be in the conversation of great coaching jobs in 2025. When we talk about scheme, when I was talking about the evolution of the sport and finding new answers, the way that some of the film guys that know the X's and O's better than me would break down some of his plays on Twitter on almost a weekly basis. I'm thinking of that one a few weeks ago where they had two running backs on the field. They had ETN in motion, and they was doing an orbit motion, and then he went back the way that he would faked that he was going to orbit away from, and he went back that direction and held both linebackers, and then they just ran Tootin out of a backfield alignment. ETN was in motion from like a wide alignment back behind where those linebackers were, and all of the candy with ETN held those linebackers. Tootin's wide open. Nobody follows the other running back on the play. He released, I think, through the guard and the tackle, through the offensive line, and Lawrence hit him for like a 15-yard touchdown pass. But I saw like 4 different film people break it down and talk about how sick this was in terms of what it did to the defensive rules and everything. And those people understand what defenses have to do better than I do. And I just thought it was fascinating that everyone's like, Liam Cohen designed this amazing play. You got the Travis Etienne 3 receiving TD game a few weeks ago as well. This element of using the running backs in the passing game that I think a lot of the best offenses for 20 years now have been able to do. You go back to like the Sean Payton Saints offenses and the Darren Sproles and stuff. And especially now when you have the taking away the explosives mentality and the too deep shell and all of that, you have to be able to get the high success rate stuff underneath. And that's something that Trevor Lawrence has never been willing to do. And I talked about this in the offseason, that Baker Mayfield's ADOT came way down under Liam Cohen. He developed that a lot quicker under Liam Cohen, and they threw to the backs a lot last year with the Bucs and were able to do it very successfully to help them with the high success rate plays. And that's what brought up Baker Mayfield's completion percentage and all of those things last year. It was going to be a harder challenge, I think, to get that out of Lawrence. And they still haven't necessarily done that. Lawrence is still very, very aggressive downfield, but they have untapped the running backs in the receiving game now, which is a huge part of, we talked about it with all the different teams, even the vertical passing to the running backs, getting the matchups. Some of ETN's cut receiving TDs have been vertical as well, as was Tootin's that I just described. Being able to do all of that, even in a season where Brian Thomas has seemed disinterested at times and is not a great season, you have the Travis Hunter injury. They go and trade for Jacoby Myers. They find new answers. Brenton Strange hurt, and obviously they wanted to be able to use him. Liam Cohen has continued to find answers with a different roster than he had in August. His plan was to have 2 star receivers. Neither of them has been a star receiver this year. Instead, they're going Parker Washington and Jacoby Myers and the running backs in the passing game. And Trevor Lawrence has his best passing season of his career. This is a team that's hosting a playoff game. And it's it's kind of a bummer that they have to host the Bills because those are 2 really fun stories in the AFC this year. One of them's going to lose right away because the Bills, obviously Josh Allen, first time he's in the playoffs, doesn't have Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and all these people in there with him. Jaguars are hosting. That's a tough, some people are saying the Bills are going to make the run to the Super Bowl. It's a tough task to go beat the Jaguars in Jacksonville. And then maybe they have to go to Denver next. Anyway, as we talk through the Super Bowl stuff, Bills have a tough road. Jacksonville still really do like them, but it's even tougher for them now to think about they have Buffalo on their doorstep. Josh Allen's going to play great football in the postseason. He always does. And yet, again, we're talking about the coaching element of it, how good coaches do with the rosters that they have. Liam Cohen came into a team that had Trent Baalke for years and years and years, not developing a great roster necessarily. They do change the GM. One of the things I love about Cohen is he declined that job until they fired Baalke. You will recall, flew back to Tampa, was just going to stay as their OC, and then Tampa ended up being all mad that he told them that he was going back there, and then they basically were like, all right, fine, we'll fire Trent Baalke, and then they did, and then he was like, all right, I'll be the head coach now. As long as you're going to let me work with somebody who knows what he's doing. Again, I think
and by someone
positive.
Who knows what he's doing, you're talking about someone who has mortgaged the farm for a player who's not on this team right now and wasn't good on offense or defense while he was.
Yeah, I should have said is not
that
Trent
move.
Baalke.
That move has not stopped them from what they're doing. Now, I had Cohen a little bit lower on my list in part because I do think there's probably an element of needing to prove this a little bit more than some of their coaches. At the same time, I think there's an argument that if you really were forced to choose today, you would want Cohen over McDonald, in part because that offensive element with the Seahawks still is, again, for me, a huge problem. Whereas you look at the Jaguars, and this is maybe the team right now where you could say their identity is that we're just going to be good at everything. And by everything, it's offense, defense, our coach is a mastermind, our QB is an elite competitor. then this is a team that made that pick for Travis Hunter. And then despite it being a bust of, epic proportions right now, I mean, it could still work out in the future. It's probably doesn't have nearly the odds it did. They turned around their point differential by over 250 points. We talk about, Dan Campbell building up the Lions. We talk about McDonald in 2 seasons making the Seahawks look like the most formidable team in football. The Jaguars were a team last year that was 31st in defensive yards allowed. Right? Liam Cohen took over a team that was, basically the worst in football. It was in that mix, and now has them as more or less our favorite outside of the actual draw, which is very problematic. If you don't consider the draw, they're our favorite to make the Super Bowl. On the AFC side, we think they're that good.
Yeah, incredible team. Agree with you about the proving it thing. This is a tough spot. I think we're still in that top tier, but the reason that neither of us took these guys in the top 3 or 4 picks, and I certainly for me, is that I think there's a little bit more, there's the same amount of upside, but a little bit more risk with Cohen. Definitely agree with you. There's a little bit more risk with even then Ben Johnson, for example. And the reason that there's a gap there, Ben Johnson showed it for longer with the Lions and stayed there for a while. Cohen, first year OC, first year head coach, 2 great results. Taking over a random team, I would have a lot of faith that he's going to find answers. It also is who knows? Just the way that he said Duval when he got hired is still etched in the back of my brain, and we should all be very scared of. Anyway, over to you. Who's the next pick?
Well, I'm going to go with someone who didn't have a great year until you consider the context, and then it starts to look like the greatest season of all time. Bennett, I don't know how closely you were tracking this because they have been a somewhat irrelevant team for a while, but the Minnesota Vikings went 9-8 with the worst quarterback play in NFL history.
They went 9-8?
9-8.
I did not realize that. I did have O'Connell as one of my 2 remaining top tier head coaches. Great pick.
Kevin O'Connell took over the Vikings in 2022. They had been 8-9 the previous season. They probably were 8-9. You look at the peripherals for the team, 8-9 type of team. He immediately goes 13-4 with Kirk Cousins. We know that there was some good fortune in terms of winning close games in that season. They take a step back with him. They have to go to Sam Darnold. They go 14-3 with Sam Darnold. And the people are like, well, Sam Darnold's won 14 games twice, as you were referencing. What's even accomplishing? He just won 14 games again. Winning 14 games with Sam Darnold has basically put these 2 coaches at the
top of our list.
They're on the NFL head coaching Mount Rushmore because they were able to win 14 games with Sam Darnold. The other thing here with O'Connell, you've got, I think, a tactical genius. You've got someone who seems to have a calm and winning demeanor on the sideline. You have someone who brought in Brian Flores after there were lots of concerns with him. And out of all the coaches in the NFL, including the ones that we put at the top of our list, Brian Flores may have had the best season of any coach and any responsibility in the entire NFL. And Kevin O'Connell is part of that. And one of the reasons that you would be excited about the Vikings going forward is that you can see dedication to them being dominant on both sides of the ball as they get this QB situation figured out, which is not guaranteed, right? Figuring out your QB situation in the NFL can be a massive, massive headache. But now they've had a winning season with Kirk Cousins, Sam Darnold, and JJ McCarthy. JJ McCarthy, you contrast his numbers with Zach Wilson, and Zach Wilson looks like a Hall of Famer. That's how bad JJ McCarthy has been. They went 9-8. This Minnesota Vikings team, the NFC West and the NFC North are going to be insane headache divisions for the teams that have to participate in those divisions going forward. The Arizona Cardinals, as they're about to hire a new head coach here, have probably got to be we're going to go 3-14 for the next decade.
Love the pick. we've talked about O'Connell, and he was one of the big things that we were talking about when we decided to do this. And agree with you completely. I think I was talking about it then that I thought he did an incredible coaching job this year. They had a positive point differential. They wound up with, and you give Flores a lot of credit for what they did defensively for sure, but they wound up with a good roster or a good season despite won 5 straight games to close the season. That's how they got to 9-8, despite the quarterback play, as you mentioned, being, I mean, atrocious. And I don't think you overstated it by saying one of the worst quarterback play seasons of all time. It's a great pick. I think he belongs right here. The name that I had one spot ahead of him still that I almost took instead of Liam Cohen, it's probably not a surprise at this point. I took McVay several rounds ago, and obviously the McVay and Shanahan things are always tied together. I'm taking Kyle Shanahan here. I do still think he's a really good coach. I think where he falls for me and why there's a gap here for anyone wondering is some of the game management stuff. He still really struggles with that. Obviously, famously, the 28-3 game and all some of the issues that they had in Atlanta at that time. A lot of that kind of stuff has still plagued him a little bit. And then there's also this thing of, yes, some of what he did early for San Francisco was so innovative and so sharp. And I do think he continues to evolve. But there's this question of like, is he starting to get on the older side, essentially? I think McVay has continued to innovate in ways that are more clear to me, I think, than, I mean, maybe I just don't understand it, than what Shanahan is doing. Obviously had another great year this year amid a ton of injuries. They did completely fall apart in 2024 with some things not going well. He's continued to have some pretty bad results with some of the draft capital stuff. Obviously, like, I mean, the Trey Lance pick, it's a lot of the running backs that they've gone out and drafted and then not really used. Doesn't necessarily always get the most out of all of his players. And yet all of that said, at the same time, this is a guy who we talk about the Shanahan tree. We talk about all of the coaches. People want his assistants. That's why Clint Kubiak is where he is, right? He used to coach under Shanahan, who coached under Clint Kubiak's dad, who coached under Kyle Shanahan's dad, right? It's all developed from the Mike Shanahan, Gary Kubiak days. But Kyle Shanahan, certainly one of the better coaches in the NFL. I'm not sure if he's even the best pick left on the board if I was purely making these decisions. I do think he's like the safest pick. I feel pretty good about what he would be able to do with a default roster. He'd be able to build a winning team. I guess I don't know that he would have the best chance of winning the Super Bowl. Most of the other picks I've made are like pure ceiling shots. I mean, there are guys, like you mentioned, Sean McVay had some bad years in the last few years. And my thought when you were saying that was, yeah, but the other years he went to the Super Bowl, basically, right? Like I said, the best team in football, some of those other years. Mike McDonald, that was a concept. Liam Cohen, that was a concept. It's like, I'm picking guys that I think are like ceiling shots. And that was kind of ribbing you about Dan Campbell. Everything he does well, I don't know if he's as much of a pure ceiling shot or if he's shown that. As we eventually talked about in 2023, they were plays away from being in the Super Bowl. So maybe that's not fair on Dan Campbell either. Shanahan is the first pick I've made that feels more like a floor pick where it's like, yeah, he belongs here. He's still a big part of this top tier. I don't know that I have another guy that is clearly in this top tier. There's a few that are very close for me. I'm curious to see where you go next, but I do think Kyle Shanahan needed to come off the board pretty soon. That's the pick I'm making here.
Yeah, I had Shanahan at 6, one spot ahead of Liam Cohen. I do have that as the end of a tier. I think what they've done this season, having given up the receivers and made it just so much less clear that the quarterback play was being driven by the great cast and the coaching staff, to where now it's like, I mean, Brock Purdy is good, right? I don't think that it's fair to debate that. Brock Purdy compared with Sam Darnold, I mean, you would take Brock Purdy every single time. But it's still Shanahan who's doing so many of the things. And in some ways, I think the brilliance there, when you don't have a Puka, when you don't have a Devontae Adams as sort of a goal line touchdown guy, it is interesting to see the differences in terms of the running games that the two teams have developed. It's bizarre to have Kyron Williams and Blake Corum just running through air and Christian McCaffrey tackled in the backfield every time. But I also want to give credit to Shanahan to have the willingness to go out and get McCaffrey, who is probably the most unique piece in the entire NFL on offense, and understand that that was going to be the thing that took everything to the next level. had some bad luck in the Super Bowls. You mentioned the tactics. The tactics are the thing that kept him from being, 2 or 3 on my list.
Yeah.
But even with that, I mean, if they just get a little bit luckier, he's talking about having multiple Super Bowl championships and probably just goes off number 1 because you have that in the background. And then you have this season without the pieces on offense. They also made a lot of moves defensively to sort of rebuild. They're one of these teams that has had to make some decisions because the team is so good and you do have turnover at times within the roster. You go back to Robert Saleh. We know the defense has been bad, but it's interesting in terms of the gap between yards and points last year and that kind of flipping in the other direction this year. Some of that, again, is just going to be very fluky, but I do like this intent to be dominant on the defensive side of the ball as well. They haven't been as much the last couple of seasons, but under him, the 49ers have been a very, very good defensive team. You can put some of that certainly on the overall organization. This is a front office that on that side of the ball has actually been pretty competent, even with some of the draft pick gaffes that have been massive blunders, right? But they have built a roster that's pretty interesting.
That's interesting because we're giving him some credit for stuff that is maybe more GM and not defense. And we've talked about this a little bit. The other side of the ball for a lot of these coaches, I agree with everything you just said, including the fact that some of the stuff that's happened to him in the postseason was more just bad luck even than some of it. They deserved to win the 28-3 game. I mean, that was so many things had to happen, even though they did some things that weren't perfect. And then also the Niners Super Bowl against the Chiefs is the other one you're referencing. And if he would have won both of those Super Bowls, we would have been talking about him probably. I agree with that point, like right at the very top. And so it is a little bit unfair. At the same time, the one thing that you didn't say in all that I had said that I do want to reiterate, I think it's important. You made the comment that if you had a guy like Puka's a day 3 receiver that Sean McVay helped. Obviously, Puka Nacua is a superstar. They identified him and developed him to some degree and helped him become a superstar. Kyle Shanahan has Ricky Pearsall in the first round, a much higher draft pick. And what are we getting out of him? Yeah, I mean, some of that falls back on Shanahan. If we're going to give him some credit for what they've done defensively and team building and some of those things, we got to give him some credit for the fact that they haven't gotten anything out of some of these draft picks. It's not just bad draft picks that he's the coach. Why don't they have? I'm not saying McVay deserves credit for Puka. I am saying, why doesn't Kyle Shanahan have a Puka? Why wasn't Tyrion Davis-Price or somebody the Puka, right? Like,
both of these teams are, we'll just say, very confident when they make crazy personnel decisions. Sometimes they work out and it feeds this narrative in their own minds that their brilliance justifies further reaches. Obviously, the Rams are in a little better shape recently on that side of it. I do think that we're hitting. Go ahead.
I love that we both had the same tier. That was my tier break. I said I kind of said there's some others that were near. That's where I had the tier break after 7. You said the same thing. This is where I think it really opens up. You have a really hard choice here. Again, I think there are some good coaches left that you could argue or, knocking on the door or in this group. But I also think those guys, like, you could make an argument for like 10 dudes right now. So anyway, good luck.
Well, I'm going to break from what we've been doing, and I'm going to go for an old guy. Payton took over a 5-12 Broncos team coming off of the 2022 season. They're minus 56 point differential his first year. They're plus 114 in 2024. They have better luck in close games in 2025. They win the top seed. They are plus 90. The team obviously benefits quite a bit from being utterly dominant on the defensive side of the ball. You go back and look through what he did with the New Orleans Saints. One of the things that I guess I didn't really realize, at least from the perspective of it being like front of mind, is that when he took over the Saints in 2006 and obviously got Drew Brees at the same time, it was a little bit of a slow build into the utter dominance. From the perspective of that first year, they were 10-6 and losing the NFC Championship. But then they go 7-9 and 8-8. And that part is a bit bizarre, especially the 7-9 season where they weren't even that good at scoring points. But the defensive side of it,
the defense was terrible.
Was awful.
Yeah,
was awful, which allowed them to go 8-8 when they were number 1 in yards and number 1 in points in 2008. I mean, you know that your defense is bad when you're exactly 500 despite that. And then they go on this run, obviously, where they win the Super Bowl in 2009 and then 11-5, 13-3. Interestingly, 4 of the next 5 seasons, they are below 500, but then go on another run to finish out the Breeze era where they're 11-5, 13-3, 13-3, and 12-4. It's hard to win that many games as an NFL head coach, even when you have Drew Brees across all of it. I don't think that Sean Payton is necessarily doing things with his current Broncos team that will get anybody as fired up offensively as some of these things that you've mentioned for, say, Liam Cohen, certainly the things that Ben Johnson is doing. We know that Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay are going to be matchup and play calling wizards. At the same time, one of the things that made its way into the article that I have coming out relatively soon is that
enjoy that in February.
Right. This is the one that I did the first 3 rounds, like on a forensic basis, player by player. I'm doing the entire rest of the draft in a big article coming up
for 2026.
For kind of looking back at all of my evaluations on 2025. Right. And you have this shocking kind of contrast between some of the teams at the top in deep passing. I know I reference this all the time or have given you, some sort of nuggets of it, suggesting that SIS is more enthusiastic about some of the other passers than it seems like would be justified. I was going through this in the QB section, and Stafford, Drake May, the 2 guys with over 100 vertical passing yards per game, passes with 15 plus air yards. One of the things that you see in the advanced numbers for SIS is that May gets moved down into a mix of other QBs that you think back and I just don't think those guys were the same at all compared to what he did. Matthew Stafford, Caleb Williams, and Bo Nix had their pass catchers combined for 25 drops on passes that travel at least 15 yards in the air. And I put those 3 guys together because it's spread basically evenly across the board. And you think about like straight up drops on these vertical passes are going to knock down passing yardage and potentially long touchdowns very, very quickly. Sam Darnold, who we've been kind of joking about, and Drake May, their guys combined for 1. The 2 of them combined, vertical passes, 1 drop all season. Now, that's not to say that Williams and Nix especially had the type of season that Drake May had, because they did not. But you think about the Broncos leading the NFL in drops overall. You think about the decision that the Broncos made to de-emphasize Troy Franklin during their bye week, which was interesting. One of the other notes that kind of popped out for me, Troy Franklin was easily leading the Broncos and was top 10 in the entire NFL in air yards per game going into the Broncos bye. And unfortunately was not great at converting them, right? The pieces around Bo Nix on offense are probably pretty bad. And that does make a difference as we're thinking about what Sean Payton is doing offensively. He and Nix are both being a little bit limited by the surrounding weapons, and yet the Broncos are still the number 1 seed. I think that you've got to give defensive coordinator a lot of credit for what the defense is doing, and that is what's driving the Broncos right now. But certainly the ability to just completely turn the Broncos around in short order. We talked a little bit about personnel, to know that Bo Nix was going to be the guy who could do what he wanted, which was, complete and total sack mitigation. And you would have the Broncos at the number 1 seed a few years after being hired with plenty of skepticism that, you've abandoned the Saints with like this idea of kicking the salary cap down the road, finally was no longer tenable. I mean, Sean Payton's just like, I'm going to be a coach that coaches a team that gets the number 1 seed pretty frequently. That's just what I do.
He has some incredible results. I didn't realize that 7-9 stretch with the Saints followed by the 4 really good years. I'm looking at it now, and their defense was really bad for that 7-9 stretch. But those 4 good years, 117 plus 117 point differential was their worst year out of those 4 years. 4 straight years with really, really strong point differentials. Because if you get over plus 100, I mean, that's really strong. We were talking about this year, the Seahawks lead the league at 191. There's only 6 teams over 100. 2 of them are the Texans and Bills are at 116 and 109. They're pretty close to 100. My point here is the Saints were pretty clear of that plus 100 in each of those final 4 years of strong results that you referenced. And then now he's having that kind of impact with the Broncos. They were actually only plus 90 this year. They had a lot of close wins. They go 14-3. They did have that really difficult travel schedule stuff that we talk about. I've talked about on the show a lot and have kept in mind. And I do think Payton did a really good coaching job as a result of that. I had him quite a ways down still here, Sean. I think he's a very strong coach. I think I had him unfairly far down. And I made this list in 5 minutes beforehand. And I have most of the old coaches down because I was originally thinking of this concept of building a franchise with no end date. And Payton's a little bit on the older side. But he was a guy that I had in my mind when I made the comment about Andy Reid and Dick Vermeil, of a coach who's gone from one place where he's successful to another place and shown an ability to be very successful there as well. There's not a lot of coaches like that. Payton has done it now pretty clearly, and I think that makes him an exceptional coach. And he's still had answers for the modern NFL and those things. And what a lot of what he does schematically, using a lot of different guys, it's frustrating for fantasy for this exercise in terms of taking over a random offense or a random team. You'd kind of want a coach like Payton who can do a lot of different sub packages and use guys for what they're good at. He'd probably be very good in this particular exercise as well. I mean, it would be a boost for the way that he likes to do things. He'd get value out of his second tight end, whoever that is, some random guy, his new Adam Troutman. He would need to acquire all of the former Saints and former Broncos that know his system onto that roster first. That would be important. But no, he's a fun pick there. I'm going to go Mike Vrabel. I want to be clear that I am not taking this pick because I'm worried that the Patriots fans are going to be mad at me because I've been saying so much about how he doesn't deserve Coach of the Year. I do think the Patriots fans are going to be mad at us for not taking Mike Vrabel higher because he's going to win Coach of the Year this year. I think he's an incredible coach. That's why I'm taking him. I think Mike Vrabel's a really, really good coach. I also don't think he belongs in the top 7 of this particular exercise, but I've loved Mike Vrabel as a coach since Tennessee. I think he's done a lot of things really right. I also think there are some things his teams have done schematically that hold back some of the ceiling in some of the bigger upside opportunities. They always limited A.J. Brown more, like his impact more than, that probably had more to do with Ryan Tannehill, had more to do with Derrick Henry and being a run-based offense and throwing off of that. They were, I just wrote this in a piece yesterday, but they were sort of the old version of what the current Seahawks are, where it's like they ran a ton, and then people would look at like the EPA per play and be like, well, Ryan Tannehill is the engine of the offense because look at his EPA per play. It's like the fact that he doesn't drop back that much and have that many plays is a huge part of that discussion. Same deal with Sam Darnold this year. For a lot of people looking at EPA per play and those kinds of stats are like, Sam Darnold's one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL because look at how good he is at EPA per play. The relevant part is how run heavy they are. Vrabel did that for years with Derrick Henry, and I think it was probably necessary there. I think with Drake May, they've been willing to open it up a little bit more. They've done things a little bit differently. I wonder if they are, still capping some of the stuff. Some of the stuff with Travion Henderson, I think, is similar to A.J. Brown. Now, there may be arguments that the ways that he has held back rookies and let them develop have been positive. Travion Henderson, I do think, wasn't perfect early in his career, early in this season, the first half of this year. And the fact that they've been able to find ways to get a lot of value out of him later, some explosive plays and those things. They still play Stevenson a lot on the pass downs. Henderson's touching the ball more, but playing fewer snaps, and some of that kind of stuff you could argue is smart coaching for a rookie. I think probably they do just need to keep Henderson on the field a lot, although Stevenson's played good football down the stretch. I haven't actually watched their Week 18 game, but I saw that Stevenson had another strong game, scored 3 touchdowns. Henderson scored 2. They had a ton of running back TDs in that final game. I haven't had a chance to see that one. Anyway, just sort of the ways that they do some things and use some players to me has been what I'm trying to say is hard to understand, but I also might be wrong about it. I think there may be some understandable delays with the rookies and things, and then they do unleash them a little bit. They've been willing to unleash Henderson a little bit more. I think they will in the playoffs. They've unleashed, go back to those Titans years. I was talking about A.J. Brown. They did start to use him more. It was more just a raw number of dropbacks issue. They ran the ball quite a lot in those offenses. But I think Vrabel's that example of the Dan Campbell, the new Mike Tomlin you're talking about, that culture setter, that leader of men, I think is very clear with Mike Vrabel now across the 2 teams that I think the Titans were crazy to fire him. I thought that at the time. Again, I've always been really big fan of this guy as a coach who's going to elevate the rosters that he has. When they fired him, I was like, that is one of the dumbest things. And you look where the Titans are now and where they would potentially be if they had just kept Mike Vrabel and let him continue to coach that team through some of the bumps in the road as they transitioned out of the Derrick Henry era. I think they'd be in a much better position if they would have just kept a good coach and understood that the results on the field in a given year are not predictive of the future. And that's what we're talking about a little bit from the top of this, about the situations are contextualizing a coaching job for the situation. I don't think the Titans did that well as an ownership group at all when they let go of Mike Vrabel. A couple years later, he's finding a lot of success with the Patriots, and I think it's very clear he's one of the top coaches in the entire NFL. Deserves a ton of credit for a great coaching job this year. It's not a very developed roster. I'm not trying to say that he's not a guy that deserves Coach of the Year votes. I think he very much does, and I think he belongs in the top 5 for Coach of the Year, even though we draft him, 9 here. Great season by him coaching, and I think certainly one of the guys that I would be targeting in this group for this exercise if I was starting my new franchise.
He's an interesting one because I think part of the question actually has to be, did he learn things from the Tennessee Titans experience, right? And has he grown from that and maybe won't make some of the same mistakes again? I think that we have a little bit bigger sample with Vrabel than some of these other guys who popped in 2025. And I have him quite a bit down the list, which again isn't to say that he wasn't fantastic this year. But I guess for me, it really is just a Drake May situation. It's Drake May overcoming some of the things that they have put him in this incredibly easy schedule. I mean, the schedule is just mind-boggling, really. You look at what he did with the Titans, and they do go to the AFC Championship game in 2019. So this isn't a coach who is doing this stuff for his first time. But it's also interesting in that he never had better than plus 71 point differential with the Titans. He's not a guy, who was going over 100. His last 2 seasons with the Titans, he was minus 60 both years. And I'm also a bit disconcerted by the fact that the Titans were a team without an identity. I think that when you look at him as a leader, the idea that this was a pretty bad organization, which certainly has been something they've tried to drive home with how catastrophically bad the last couple of years, and yet they weren't good on offense when he was the coach there, big picture. They also weren't good on defense, right? This was a team that is basically just doing sort of the Mike Tomlin thing of like, I'm going to will us to be incompetent. And that matters. I mean, I certainly think that if you have Mike Vrabel, you big picture and long-term are going to have a winning NFL team. If you have Mike Vrabel with a Drake May, then maybe you do go on this run where they win a bunch of Super Bowls. I think if they get knocked out pretty quickly in the playoffs, which isn't guaranteed, but is certainly a possibility, then we have this question of next season when the schedule is likely to be more representative of what most teams deal with. Like, what do they do as an encore? And does he have the actual coaching chops to be a part of that? Or is he mostly the caretaker of what other people are doing?
I want to ask you, you said we have a longer sample on him. He coached the Titans for 6 years, and you talked about the point differential. I'm looking at it now. In their last 17 years, the Titans have 3 seasons where they have better than a plus 20 point differential, and all 3 were under Mike Vrabel, 3 consecutive years until Tannehill was at the back end of his career, and then Will Levis was his quarterback the last year. Then they immediately, and you said they had a minus 60 those 2 seasons, and they did. They immediately went to minus 149 and then minus 194 in the 2 years following Vrabel's departure. And prior to his arrival, they were in the negative under Mike Mularkey. They had just a few years prior to that under Wisenhunt, they were at minus 124, minus 184, just under Munchak, and then the end of the Jeff Fisher era, all just really bad years. And
Jeff Fisher, arguably a similar type of coach, 3 seasons in this organization with plus 100 or more.
Fisher did. Yeah. Way back in the 00s, he had in 2000, 2003, and 2008, he did have some strong years. But Vrabel made people think Ryan Tannehill was like a star. And Ryan Tannehill has not even played quarterback again, or part of his teams. He had the point differential of plus 50 for 3 straight years. It was never better than plus 71. They got the number 1 seed one year. I thought he did a really, really good coaching job over the years with the Titans for taking over a roster that wasn't probably very good.
Then was it Mike Vrabel who did that, or was it Arthur Smith who made people think?
Oh my God. I'm just wondering, when you say the larger sample, I look at this sample of years that he coached the Titans as elevating. And you did come around to that and say that he, if you have him, you're probably going to win games, but maybe there's sort of a cap on the ceiling. I wouldn't necessarily deny that. It'll be really interesting to see this next era with Drake May, because he has not had a quarterback like that. He had a lot of success with Ryan Tannehill. You said they didn't have an identity. I think they had an identity with Derrick Henry. The problem was their identity was a running game identity, because it didn't really have the ability to do a lot else with it. And that's a tough way to win in the NFL. They found that out in the playoffs a couple of those years, but they had the 1 seed that one year. And then they found out that it's tough to win with a running identity in the postseason. You have to have a quarterback that can do some things. It would be fascinating to see him with May in this postseason and in the next few years, as you talked about. But I mean, fair counterpoints.
So I was going to go with another one of the old coaches who I think is just a dominant coach, but I can't help myself. I'm going to go in a different direction, and I'm going to pick Shane Steichen here, because I think that you want to score every possession, which is what they did when they had Daniel Jones. Right? And we were having this conversation at the midpoint of the season where people were arguing that Jonathan Taylor's season was not impressive because he had gotten the upgrade of Daniel Jones at quarterback. Daniel Jones. And the Colts were unstoppable with Daniel Jones.
It's great. That's what I tweeted when I tweeted about it. I was like, you got a winning season out of Daniel Jones. And then I got replies that were like, I mean, Steichen was next on my list too. I'm like actually tilted that you snapped to me on Shane Steichen, but I got replies that were like, it wasn't even Daniel Jones. This is a team that won from Jonathan Taylor, and something about how their defense played higher. I'm just like, what? This doesn't even refute my point, which is that they were able to win with a Daniel Jones quarterback, but also like Daniel Jones played the best football of his career this year. Like, it was sort of him. They built a system around Daniel Jones that made them viable. Anyway, I'm with you.
And we think about having a little bit longer track record that we can look at. And I know that people in Indianapolis are frustrated with his actual results as a head coach in Indianapolis, but the context again does matter. And you look at Steichen, and it's certainly not all on him, these other things that have been accomplished, because the players in question, I think, are obviously very good. But Steichen is the guy who oversaw Justin Herbert as a controversial prospect explode onto the NFL scene and absolutely dominate for the Chargers. Steichen is the guy who turned the Philadelphia Eagles offense and Jalen Hurts into this unstoppable juggernaut and evolved some of the few things that they do well to this day. One of the kind of fun notes on him is that in his 2 seasons there, in addition to everything else, where their offensive numbers just across the board were fantastic, they set new single season franchise records for third down conversion percentage in back-to-back season. Now, again, we know that a lot of that is going to be based on some of the short yardage things you can do with Jalen Hurts. But when you have this background of being a quarterback whisperer and also being just pretty clearly an offensive genius. And then you are short-circuited by having QB play that is beyond the pale bad. I mean, this is what we were talking about with Anthony Richardson coming in, where he was arguably the worst passer that any team had ever tried at the QB position. And it just simply didn't work, right? It's not, it was guaranteed to fail. He's got a big arm. He's very athletic. There are things you can do around that, but it didn't work. And I don't think it was his fault. Again, you selected a guy in the top 5 of the NFL draft who was a horrifically awful college passer. That's just going to set your team back. As soon as they were freed from that, you have, I mean, again, Daniel Jones. Shane Steichen had a pretty easy pick right here.
Daniel Jones had a 68% completion percentage, best of his career. He had a 4.9% TD rate. That's best since his rookie year. He had a 5.2% rate as a rookie back in 2019 in 12 starts. Has not been higher than 3.2% since then. So 4.9, 5.2%. Those are like spiked. We talk about how past TD rates can spike. Those are spiked past TD rates for sure. He, according to Pro Football Reference, they have a passing success rate metric here. Led the league in the passing success rate metric at a 52% success rate. And that was a career high. First year of his career with a quarterback rating over 100. I mean, again, I'm not saying like even all these stats are super relevant or that he's amazing or anything. Career high adjusted yards per attempt, 8.1, yards per attempt, 8.1, standard yards per attempt, both career highs. He'd never been 7.0 at either. He's over 8.1. I mean, Shane Steichen took Daniel Jones and immediately elevated him. Immediately through scheme, through smart offense. It was all through the RPO stuff, right? Like, yeah, the running game was a huge part of it, but a great coaching job. The thing that I tweeted was the point that you did so well in the first half of the year that you raised expectations, and then people are going to get mad that they collapsed because the schedule got harder or something. It's just crazy to me. To your point, he was dealing with Richardson prior. You get him a quarterback that's able to execute the well-called plays. That's the way to phrase it. Because Richardson missed so many throws of open players, and the defenses were loading the box and giving you the one-on-ones downfield, and Richardson's missing them. And you can't win as a good schematic coach. The only way you're going to win with Anthony Richardson is like more or less the pure athleticism and the pure playmaking. But Steichen wanted a quarterback or a system that he could build, create open passing, out scheme, and then the quarterback has to be able to make the throws that are available on time and accurately. That's basically all you're asking Daniel Jones. He's been able to do that, the catch and run stuff with Tyler Warren and some of the other guys, but he's also been able to hit some of the downfield stuff to Alec Pierce and those things. But I mean, this offense was legitimately very good. Being gaslit a little bit, acting like this wasn't a good coaching job just because they collapsed down the stretch. Again, if Daniel Jones doesn't tear his Achilles, I'm not even confident that they fall apart as much, right? Like that's a huge part of it as well. They had to go to Phillip Rivers, or they chose.
We're talking about them as the number 1 overall seed in the AFC.
Yeah, at a point in time, we were looking at them as a real candidate. It's kind of a bummer that they didn't even get a chance to make the postseason because of really the injury to Daniel Jones, which again, you said Daniel Jones' name over and over. You're like, Daniel Jones. I mean, the fact that losing Daniel Jones ruins your season, it gets to the fact that they were elevating.
And I'm a bit of a Daniel Jones apologist, which I think played out somewhat favorably this year. But again, it's still Daniel Jones. It's like winning the NFC number 1 seed with Sam Darnold.
So you take Shane Steichen. I got to figure out who's next. I'm going to go. I don't love this pick, but I'm going to go Matt LaFleur. I do think he's a good coach. I don't love how run heavy he is, and everything is sort of built off of that. It's a little bit like the Vrabel stuff in terms of the ways that he does things. And you get a little bit of that with the Jordan Love stuff where the like EPA per drop back always looks amazing. And it's like, yeah, I mean, if they asked him to pass more, I would be curious how it would look because they're just running so much and then throwing in other situations, throwing in like sort of only in non-obvious situations or more limited situations. But obviously Jordan Love has played very good football. I do think he's a part of it. And then, it's really hard to look at Matt LaFleur without acknowledging that like Love has played really well. And then obviously Aaron Rodgers at the end of his career with Green Bay, the beginning of LaFleur's coaching career with Green Bay. was an MVP level player. I mean, he's still playing at a really high level, was able to win MVPs. But I do think you have to give LaFleur credit for managing the end of the Aaron Rodgers era in Green Bay, for developing Love as well, and getting really high-end quarterback play out of both of those guys in a way that's made the offenses work. Again, I think he calls too many runs. I think there are some issues there. I don't necessarily love the way that they use their receivers from a personnel standpoint. I don't think they maximize skill sets necessarily. A lot of the decision-making, I think, is a little too conservative, like the extra running, and even just like the reliance on Romeo Doubs, who's been very good, but not at all the ceiling type. This year, they went a little bit more towards Christian Watson. The lack of developing Jaden Reed into more of a 2-receiver set and like full-time guy, I think, was questionable. And obviously, he missed most of this year, but some of that personnel type stuff is a problem for me relative to the results. Now, you do have to acknowledge the results. LaFleur's had a lot of strong results during his time in.
I guess that would be my argument for him, like contrasted with Vrabel, is that if we're going to look at someone who is just purely based on the wins and losses, right? When you go 13-3, 13-3, 13-4 in your first 3 seasons with the team, and certainly they haven't been in collapse mode since then. They've been very solid. And if Jordan Love had been completely healthy over the last couple of years, you're looking at them in 2024 and 2025 as being a lot better even than what the actual results are. I mean, QB starting injuries, they matter. I would say because of like the run pass thing. That's the only thing though. I mean, the results are completely and totally there to actually be in that top tier that we talked about.
And that's right. And the other thing I would say though, in his favor is, oddly enough, you mentioned the Jordan Love injuries, is what he's done from a coaching job with Malik Willis. Every time he's had Malik Willis, people are talking about Malik Willis is going to get paid this year. And I think Malik Willis has played really well, but the first time they had to start Malik Willis last year in 2024, they threw the ball like 8 times and they won a game. They developed this like crazy run scheme, and everyone was talking about how, again, the X's and O's people were talking about how involved the rushing attack was. They did some Jaden Reed running, they did some running to the backs, and then they did some running with Malik Willis, and they basically ran the ball 10. I think it was against the Bengals that first game out of or without Love last year, and they had a massive run rate and were able to win a game. And actually look very competent as an offense. And then Willis, since then, every time they've taken over, they've been very run heavy, but very good run heavy. They've been able to be a dynamic, multifaceted run game. And then Willis was able to throw off of that really well, recently at the end here of 2025 and looked really good again as well. The ability to tailor game plan to talent is the point that I'm trying to make there. You go to a backup quarterback who's got the athleticism, maybe not as developed as a drop back read out passer. He goes even more run heavy. Again, we both agree that he goes too run heavy sometimes, but in those situations with Malik Willis, I like that point of, scheme to talent is what I'm always talking about, right? This is what I have to work with. I'm going to get the most out of the talents of the players that I have by building a game plan around what they are. And I think that's good coaching. And I think he's been able to do that with Willis, in addition to, at times with Love and other guys.
So since you passed on him here and sounds like you may not really even be considering him, I am going to go ahead and take Jim Harbaugh with my next selection. We're talking about some of these point differentials. Those first 3 dominant seasons with the 49ers, he was plus 151, plus 124, and plus 134. Then an 8-8 season to finish that out. Obviously then goes to the Wolverines, kind of changes the way their long-term series with the Ohio State Buckeyes goes. I don't know, there's too much to say about that other than the cheating stuff, although widespread, always does rub you a little bit the wrong way. But then you come out with this Los Angeles Chargers team. And one of the interesting things about the Chargers, and again, as you try to think about what actually matters from a coaching perspective, I don't know that Brandon Staley was that bad. And certainly his offensive coordinator in the final season in Kellen Moore has come off of that with 2 fantastic seasons, one with the Philadelphia Eagles and leading them to a Super Bowl title as an offensive coordinator, and then just a shockingly competent season as the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. But you think about just the immediate changes with the Chargers, where they become a more professional organization across the board, and the attention to detail, the leadership, and the desire to be good at more or less everything, and have a very clear-cut identity where we're just going to be the dominant team on both sides of the ball. If you can actually come out and just consistently execute that like Jim Harbaugh does wherever he goes, that wins football, right? They go from the minus 52 to plus 101 in his first season. And then I think to be 11-6 and I think an interesting upset pick in the first round of the playoffs on a team where so much of your identity actually was built around those tackles, and then you lose them and your team is still extremely competent. It's quietly actually one of the best defenses in the entire NFL. I mean, Jim Harbaugh would probably look at our rankings and be like, if you guys don't have me in the top 2 or 3, you have no idea what football is about.
He definitely deserved to go by now. I'm not going to lie. My preliminary list, I had him in my next couple lists, in my preliminary list, my next couple names. And then as we're working through this and we're 2 hours in and I haven't had lunch yet, we're getting into the afternoon here. I was reading his name as John Harbaugh on my list, even though I have John Harbaugh on the list a little bit further down. I hadn't even considered Jim Harbaugh, Chargers coach, in the last few rounds in my brain. He belonged a little bit higher. I don't know if I would have taken him over my pick Vrabel 2 rounds ago. I do think if you gave me a take back, I would take him over Matt LaFleur, although I think LaFleur is a good pick there as well. But Harbaugh, a strong pick there. The way that you said it, at first you were like, you passed on him, and I'm like, oh, this is a typical Sean comment, like it was an obvious name. But no, it was a pass. I did pass on a guy that I should have probably been considering at that stage. I probably would have let him go for a couple more rounds because I wasn't even like internalizing who
didn't
he was.
Have him on board.
No, didn't have him on my board, but he was a good pick there. I have a tricky spot here coming back. This is where you get into the longtime coaches. I think there's some interesting younger coaches still as well. I think I'm going to take, I've taken so many like defensive minded coaches, or I don't know. I guess LaFleur wasn't, but he's a run heavy coach, and I just took Vrabel. I'm going to take Mike Tomlin. You're going to probably kill me for taking him over Andy Reid, but Mike Tomlin's been really good for a long time. It's tough to, I think we talked about some of the other guys as the new Mike Tomlins, the new example of a leader of men and those kinds of things. I've never liked Arthur Smith. I think Tomlin's hiring of Arthur Smith and the way that they've developed the offense speaks to him knowing sort of what he is and what he wants, and it's actually been a good pairing. There was a spot, I did watch that Week 18 game. There was this spot where the Steelers end up using all 3 of their timeouts in the second half, and Rodgers is yelling at Arthur Smith because he can't even get play calls in. It's like, dude, you're in Week 18 of a divisional game, and you can't even get a freaking play call. I mean, just absolutely insane. Classic Arthur Smith. He's probably
there
overthinking
were so many
something.
Peak like Steelers and Ravens moments in that game. It was a hilarious game.
It was an incredible football game. I was like, I love this sport. What a stupid sport. I love it so much. And there are people like, oh, everyone's talking about this like it was a great game. This is just bad football. I'm like, you're a curmudgeon, because that was great football. If you ask me, it was highly entertaining. Not like the peak of the sport, but highly entertaining football. That was awesome. Anyway,
we're talking about drafting Mike Tomlin here, and we've got some other like leadership-based coaches. I mean, they win that game, and I mean, probably this stuff happens somewhat frequently, but the cameras don't always catch it. It's not always the thing that makes sense. But he's like pounding on his chest and whooping. We're like, I mean, if you could play for somebody, you would obviously be like, Is there any chance you could fire Arthur Smith? Because I don't want to be in the same building, but otherwise, like, you're obviously the coach I want to play for.
Yeah. He seems like one that if he took over an average team, he'd get these guys playing hard. So definitely a lot of respect for Mike Tomlin. It also seems like if they would have lost that game, his Steelers career might have been over. So there's a lot of Steelers fans that are probably mad that we didn't take him higher. They really do respect him there. Although there are other Steelers fans that are done with Mike Tomlin at this point. So it's kind of fascinating. I do take him here over, I think, a strong list of deserving names. I think we at some point passed another tier break here. We're into now another group that I would not have in the group that we just went through that included Jim Harbaugh and Shane Steichen and the guys you took. And for me, I took Vrabel and Matt LaFleur and those guys. Tomlin maybe belongs with them. That's part of the reason I'm taking him is I'm like, you can't push him that much further down. His results, his success, he's done a lot with a little for a long time. He's been able to find ways to win games with different types of rosters. I think the consistency week to week is the thing I would mention with Tomlin is he always has his teams prepared weekly. And if you're able to manage Aaron Rodgers' ego at this stage of that and go to the playoffs, it's pretty impressive. Anyway, Mike Tomlin is the selection there. A lot of names, I think, here. Where are you going?
Well, I guess I would push back a tiny bit on the idea that we've hit a tier break because we're obviously just – I mean, again, we're talking about trying to win the next 3 years. And
here's the pick. Here's Big Red.
Andy Reid did for the Chiefs this last year.
We knew Big Red was coming for Shawn soon enough.
Ben, it was one of the grossest things that we've ever seen from a good team ever. And yet, I mean, you think about the all-time movie rankings, right? And you've got The Big Lebowski, and then you've got multiple just placeholder spots because there are so many tier breaks between The Big Lebowski and the next best movie. You think about television shows, and you have Deadwood, and then placeholder spots because there are that many tier breaks to the next best television show. In the NFL coaching landscape, I mean, we have Bill Belichick and then Andy Reid, and then you got to keep like 8 spots open in order to show just how far they have gapped everybody else. I mean, Andy Reid would be in that mix based on just what he did with the Philadelphia Eagles. And then you come back and you look at his tenure with the Chiefs. Now, granted, you have Patrick Mahomes, and how do you evaluate that? Well, I mean, we know how much he did for the passers with Philadelphia. The crazy thing with the Chiefs is that they go 6-11 this season. They tank their last handful of games in part because they don't have that many other choices. They played the first place schedule, but they were still plus 34 this year. And I mean, obviously this is going to be the case when you think about the situation with Patrick Mahomes, but with Alex Smith, Andy Reid was plus 125, plus 72, plus 118, plus 78, and plus 76, which is one of the reasons they didn't just start Patrick Mahomes as a rookie. I don't know.
Does he still have it?
It was really hard to watch this season. I mean, they were plus 34, right? I don't know how you can go out there with Patrick Mahomes and be 20th in yards, 21st in points. Now, again, some of that is just crashing back down because they tanked after he was injured. I mean, I don't think that he has it at the level he had it before. Does he have it still over 4 or 5 guys that we drafted ahead of him? I mean, it's kind of like the greatest players. Like, how far down can a Larry Fitzgerald or a Jerry Rice or those type of guys fall and still, like, in their late 30s be better than almost all of the wide receivers in the NFL? Andy Reid is still in the mix to be the greatest of all time. The Chiefs could easily come back, go on and run these next several years, and he puts Bill Belichick in the rearview mirror.
He does. He is 67, turns 68 in March. we talk about age cliffs, Shawn. We're doing a 3-year thing. Are you worried about 2029? Or 2028? Are you worried about the back end of this contract that you've signed him to, where he's 70? I mean, I think he can coach.
He's like,
well
I'll be
in
plus 150
2026.
next year, plus 150 in 2027, and like plus 75 in 2028. And it'll be the best number of, like, the best combined point differential of any of the coaches in this group. And he's like, I don't know if you've looked, but I have been pretty good in AFC championship games. So if you want to put me in a big game against all these jokers that you've drafted ahead of me who've never done anything, like, you do what you want to do. I'll take my resume. I'm okay with it.
I love it. Yeah, I was just gonna say I agree. I mean, the career has been long and so impressive, and the stuff about how good he was with Alex Smith, I think, is fast. I mean, it's that was some of the best coaching he ever did. He has to leave the Eagles. They kind of push him out, and he's able to build another really strong team with Kansas City. And they had some tough playoff losses in that era before Mahomes and before they broke through, where, I mean, you felt like the Chiefs could be that Cinderella team a couple of times with Alex Smith. He's a great coach. To me, it's a question of, was he answering different questions than are asked of him now, right? And similar to like Bill Belichick was great during that same time period and is no longer a head coach at this point and not going to be drafted in this. It is a big question of whether not necessarily the game's passed him by, but
if it
I don't think it has.
Like, Bill Belichick is out of the NFL because he's a jerk.
Yeah, that's
right?
probably true. That's
I mean,
part of it.
If he were Andy Reid from a personality perspective, do you think he would still? I mean, he would have to be in the mix. He'd be in the NFL, and he'd be in the mix right now at the very least.
Yeah, and there was some talk that he may even be in the mix again. His name, I haven't seen his name since the firings have happened, but there was some stuff like even late in the year after UNC had a really bad year that was like part of the reason he didn't get a job last year was some stuff that is not necessarily understood, and he may still be in the NFL coaching pool for this year. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. Maybe he pops up somewhere. I don't know. But no, I think you're right. I think with his success over his coach over his career, if he was a little bit more like Andy Reid from a personality standpoint, he probably would get an opportunity again. I'm going to go Mike McDaniel now. We talked about him a bunch earlier. We're 2 hours in. We don't have to spend a ton more time on him. I thought he did a good coaching job this year. I think Chris Greer did a really bad job as GM, was fired mid-season. McDaniel, after being hired with the Dolphins in 2022, was thought of as like the new wonderkind. He was doing all of the things you wanted your Dolphins to do: more motion, more misdirection. He was the coach that was pressing all of these McShanahan tendencies to the max and doing what you wanted out of him. They had a -2 point differential his first year, went 9-8, made the wild card, plus 105 his second year in 2023, 11-6. Obviously, Tua has the concussion issues and things. 2024, they still go 8-9. This year, they still go 7-10, despite the really slow start, early issues. And 7-10, where you kind of said that they sort of tanked at the end of the year. They go 1-4 at the end there. They play Quinn Ewers down the stretch. They've gotten all the way back to 6-7, and were more or less in the playoff picture until a loss at Pittsburgh, week 15, kind of put them out of it when they fell to 6-8, but had come back and won 5 of 6 for a stretch there, beat the Bills, beat some other sort of mostly bad teams. They beat the Falcons, Saints, Jets, Commanders during that stretch. Didn't beat a bunch of good teams this year or anything. I don't think 2025 is a great coaching year. It's a little bit like when you took Dan Campbell and said, hey, I'm not just looking at this past year, 2025. I'm looking back at 2022, 2023. Just a couple years ago, people thought Mike McDaniel was one of the most innovative head coaches in the league. One of these guys that should be up there with McVay and Cohen and Ben Johnson and all of those dudes. Now that star has faded over the last 2 years for valid reasons. I also think Greer's one of the worst GM things anyone did all offseason was not addressing backup quarterback better by Chris Greer. And really the last couple years, I think they went in the last year with Mike White. And then this year they had Zach Wilson and Quinn Ewers. You have a quarterback who has the concussion history of Tua and some of the issues as well, where there's maybe concerns that he even needs to be benched. You have to bring in quarterback, not competition, but like depth, security. You have to. It's too important of a position for them to not have gotten like Jameis Winston. How did the Giants end up with 3 quarterbacks this year? Like the Dolphins should have had Jameis Winston or Jacoby Brissett or whatever, where the Cardinals were able to move away from Kyler Murray and then have somewhat of a competent offense with Jacoby Brissett for a stretch. Just pretty insane that they never addressed the backup quarterback thing. Maybe some of that falls on McDonald. I think that McDonald, the fact that we drafted him so low, really comes down to stuff that's not particularly fair, which is like, yeah, he's scrawny. He doesn't look tough enough. He talks in a weird way, and people think he's not a leader of men. And so they just judge him that way. Like he doesn't seem like a football coach, and so he doesn't deserve to be a football coach. I think he gets a really bad rap because of that, which is, I mean, come on, that's stupid, right? And yet, I think he's done a much better job of coaching the last few years than people really give him credit for or understand. Some other strong names still out there right now, but he does belong at this point in my mind. So I'm taking him. I just taken too many defensive-oriented coaches, Sean. I needed an offensive X's and O's savant.
And he's the perfect kind of situational hire where if you've got a great GM, if you have a strong overall front office, if you are trying to, if you built out, depth across your defense, and you need that coaching final piece of the puzzle, then he's a magical hire because there are only 3 or 4 coaches in the entire NFL who can go do what he can do from a play design and play calling perspective on game day. We talked about this a little bit in the intro, but it bothers me a bit that a lot of their excuses through the years with the Tua injuries were, if not for the Tua concussions, we'd be awesome. And then they changed their tune this year to like Tua is actually the problem. I think it's hard to have it both ways. Then it's kind of fun doing this because one of the things it emphasizes there actually are a ton of great candidates, and the NFL overall is actually very well coached because I'm about to pick someone where I don't think it's like an oversight or horrible drafting that we haven't picked him so far, but I do think that there is a pick here who could have gone in the top 5.
Is it a defensive-oriented coach?
There's a coach out there who has a 32-19 career record. So, almost twice as many wins as losses, doesn't have a losing season, is plus 133 overall in his career. Played a brutal schedule.
It has to be Demeco Ryan.
2025. Brutal schedule. Won 9 consecutive games and may actually be a better version of the Seattle Seahawks, the team that we think maybe is the best in football. Demeco Ryan's, we didn't really care for it, the defending of the dirty play from his defense, and yet it's the head coach's responsibility to defend his team. We're talking about leaders. We're talking about guys who are willing and able to create a team that asserts its will on the opponent. The Houston Texans are not just stopping you. They are making you scared to play offense against them. I don't really prefer what they've done offensively. It seems like CJ Stroud has probably been hurt by the coaching staff based on how good he was as a rookie, but maybe a bit of that was fluky, and a bit of what they're actually dealing with right now is they don't have a great QB. The Houston Texans, they're not exactly my style of team, but they are a cool team. And Demeco Ryans is doing a fantastic job.
He was above McDaniel on my little preliminary list. And when I was just saying a moment ago, I wasn't taking a defensive-minded head coach, and I was asking you all these questions as you started talking about the guy that should have went. I think Demeco Ryan should have went by now as well. I think it's a good pick. The counterpoints, the concerns, the red flags with his coaching job, he seems like an incredible defensive coach, the motivator, all of that stuff. And it's really hard to manage that versus what you're seeing offensively because he's a defensive-minded coach. We've been doing this the whole show, trying to figure out how much credit to give the opposite side of the ball. Their offense is frustrating. They have a terrible offensive line. They've done a bad job of addressing all of that. They don't have the right personnel, but also the usage, the unwillingness all year to really turn Jaden Higgins or Jalen Noel loose and get those rookies playing. And then they finally both have these long touchdowns, whatever it was, week 18. and they don't even really turn them loose in that game. They're still rotational players so they can get Xavier Hutchinson on the team, who has done nothing and never been anything at the NFL level. You have to play your players. Meanwhile, they're turning Woody Marks loose as a early down runner, where his profile is not, he was not, and you're shaking your head for the audio listeners and laughing. His profile was not as an early down rusher. It wasn't just replacement level, NFL level. It was non-prospect level as an early down rusher. I just went back and looked at it the other day. I've written pretty unfairly about him, so I often go back and look. The missed tackles for stuff, terrible. Through 5 college years, right? And he played on two different teams. The yards after contact stuff, terrible. The breakaway run rates, terrible. He's not an explosive runner at all. He maybe has some vision or whatever and can get into some spaces and get a few yards for you. It's not even replacement level, really. There are too many good dynamic running backs out there that are acquirable. I know they don't have them necessarily, but Jawar Jordan goes out there and plays just a little bit at the end of the year and puts up more rushing efficiency than Woody Marks has basically all year. And Jawar Jordan is replacement level, right? Like, what do we... I'm not saying they have other answers, but the funny thing about Woody Marks is the one part of his profile you can maybe talk about is he can play on pass downs. He caught a bunch of passes in college, probably is a good pass blocker, all of those elements, and they do use him on that stuff. But CJ Stroud doesn't actually throw to the backs. He's a vertical downfield passer. He doesn't end up actually checking down a lot based on the way he plays the position and how they structure their offense. Woody Marks caught like 22 balls all year. Like that, he had like 280 catches or something in his college career. This is a guy that you should be throwing to out of the backfield, if anything, and yet you're using him as an early down plotter that's averaging 3.5 yards a carry or whatever it is as a rookie when he should have juice in his legs. I mean, I understand. I'm not saying they should be using Nick Chubb more. They probably didn't expect to not have Joe Mixon all year. That is a little bit of a tough break. I think the personnel stuff on the offensive side, both the lack of willingness to turn like a Jaden Higgins specifically loose, who looks like a big physical freak. Jaden Higgins has been very good this year, and I don't understand why they haven't used him more in any kind of way. And then
and again, to underline your point here, even as it kind of relates back to fantasy, if he were on like 29 other NFL teams, even with this kind of production, you'd be like, I'm going to take him in the 4th round of fantasy next year because the leap is obvious and it's going to be gigantic. With the Texans, you're like, he's probably not even draftable again.
Yeah, I don't even want him. So it's the offensive stuff for this team has been very frustrating. All that said, Demeco Ryans has done a very good coaching job. 12-5 team. I completely agree with you. I do think, I said a little bit ago that there was sort of an end of a tier, and you said you kind of pushed back on it. I think you're right. I think Ryans belongs in the same tier as Mike Vrabel, for example, who I took several rounds ago, and Tomlin. And those are the defensive coaches I had been taking recently, and I was like, I don't want to keep drafting him, so I took Mike McDaniel, who I do think belongs in this range as well. Demeco Ryans, good pick by you. You said there's a coach that has these really strong results, strong win-loss, all of that kind of stuff. People are yelling at us for disrespecting the Eagles again. I don't necessarily want to, but I'm going to take Nick Sirianni. I don't think he's that great of a coach. I think this is a really strong roster, and I think there's some real issues with some of the things he does. At the same time, clearly there's some culture elements there, clearly. Although, not if you ask A.J. Brown. Not if you ask some of these guys. I think you have to give, for the culture, I think you got to give some of the credit to some of the players, some of the leadership of like a Jalen Hurts, who I do think is a good locker room leader. Saquon Barkley and some of these other their offensive linemen, Lane Johnson. Some of his quotes over the last several years have been eye-opening, interesting. I remember at the Super Bowl a few years back, I think the first time they were in this era, he was talking about the predictability of offense and how they sort of self-scout and are intentionally changing their tendencies before the defense. Like you have to know what defenses are seeing are your tendencies and then change before you get found out, basically. And some of those elements, it was very interesting back in like 2022 or something. And then there was a quote earlier this year he had. The reason I remember that is earlier this year he had a quote through like week 4 or week 5 when they were even winning games that he was like, we're too predictable right now. And I just was a sharp contrast. He's an offensive lineman, a longtime veteran, but a little bit more outspoken, willingness to be like, look, from a X's and O's standpoint, we're not doing enough. And when you have veterans on your team, even in a good year, questioning your own coaching staff in terms of identifying the tendencies and those things, it's not great. I don't love taking Nick Sirianni here. At the same time, I do think at a certain point, we're starting to make results-based picks at this point. At a certain point, you do have to give him credit for some of the results. This is a really strong roster that he's coached for 5 years. 9-8 in his first year off a 4-11 season. 14-3, 11-6, 14-3, 11-6. Won the Super Bowl last year. We have not taken you're just talking about Demeco Ryans has won all these games. We hadn't taken him yet because he has a 38-15 record or whatever you said. Nick Sirianni's record is better. I'm quite sure. And also he's the current head coach that there's the current Super Bowl, the claim of the current Super Bowl champion, whatever. He may be a back-to-back Super Bowl champion if they're able to make another run this year. The Week 18 thing was baffling. I mean, there's obviously the Lions are going to play tough. They always do. They go beat the Bears. How do you rest your whole team when you have a shot at the 2 seed? They lose. And then
it's two different pieces, right? Which is, number one, the 2 versus 7 matchup is going to be dramatically different than the 3 versus 6 matchup. And then when you win, you're going to go play on the road in the second round. It's one of the worst decisions from a resting players in-season tactics perspective that we've ever seen.
Really? It is. Ever. Because teams never used to make these types of resting decisions even when they didn't have anything to play for. And now we've gone to the point where they're like, yeah, we have something to play for, but we think it's a long shot, so we're not going to do it. And it wasn't a long shot. And it actually played out in a way that now you look really, really stupid. I mean, you can scoreboard watch. You start your starters and scoreboard watch, and then if you're not going to have a shot, you pull them at halftime. I mean, you could do that stuff. You don't just bench them assuming you're going to not have it, you're not playing for something when only one other outcome has to happen. It wasn't one of those convoluted things where you need 5 other outcomes. They needed one thing, the Lions to beat the Bears. And the Lions are a good football team that always play tough.
Lions-Bears was 50-50. And if you play your starters against the Washington Commanders with Josh Johnson, it's like 99-1.
It's crazy. Truly, truly a mind-boggling coaching decision there. Nick Sirianni does a lot of truly mind-boggling things. I kind of want to undo the pick already. But he's 59-26 through 5 years, a .694 win-loss percentage in 5 seasons, and is the defending NFL Super Bowl champion and was the NFC champion in one of the other 4 seasons. He could be a 3-time in 5-year Super Bowl. We don't have the 5th year's playoff results. He's 9-6 in the playoffs. Or excuse me. Sorry. He's coached 9 seasons. He has 6 wins. He's 6-3 in the playoffs. Obviously, he hasn't lost 6 times. 6-3 in the playoffs over 4 years, has made 2 Super Bowls over 4 years, and is almost a 700 career win-loss percentage. I think he's a terrible coach. I have to take him here, Shawn.
Those kinds of picks are the tough ones, right? And this kind of gets us into the other discussion that, I mean, I don't say get in trouble for, but certainly we receive some pushback for, which is, so you think about the 2 Super Bowls too, right? 2 Super Bowls in 4 years, extraordinary. The loss is a nail biter to a fantastic Kansas City Chiefs team, and the win is a dominant blowout, one of like the most convincing Super Bowl victories. You have to kind of go back to, when we were kids, or when, I was a kid and you weren't born yet, where the NFC would frequently slaughter the AFC in the Super Bowl, to find games that were as one-sided as the Eagles' Super Bowl victory over the Chiefs last year. So, the 1-1 is also a thing where it's like one commanding, powerful victory and one like nail biter against a great, great team. So my question for you is, how do we contrast this with the Sean McDermott situation in Buffalo, where we have said not only would we not draft him, but the Bills needed to fire him to take the next step with Josh Allen, when we know that there is a lot of luck involved? The Eagles were dominant against the Chiefs, but certainly they could have been knocked out of those playoffs before that point. They didn't have to face teams necessarily like the Bills have had to face on the AFC side to get knocked out. Josh Allen has played extraordinary football. They've still lost. Some of those things, again, go to Sean McDermott's side and to tactical blunders he's made. And again, we're splitting hairs in some ways with these tactical blunders, because so much of it is just the magic of Patrick Mahomes. Sirianni is more successful than Sean McDermott. Enough more successful that one guy would be drafted here and the other one would be completely off? Or is McDermott also coming up as someone who is a valid selection?
It's a great question. McDermott's not on my list. And I have some coordinators coming up. I've got like 8 more names, it looks like, until I'm sort of, my chamber's going to be empty. I didn't put McDermott on my list. I do think the difference in results is massive. They were able to actually win the Super Bowl. The Bills haven't even made a Super Bowl. Sirianni got there twice. The fact that the game planning in 2024 that led to a dominant Super Bowl win, what you just said about their nail-biter Super Bowl loss and dominant Super Bowl win, Sean, it's humility-based drafting. It's humility-based head coach drafting. I gotta admit that whatever my issues with Nick Sirianni are, there's stuff that I may not understand that is in these results that is not quite there for McDermott. McDermott's had the regular season results that aren't as good as his. I don't have McDermott's career record up here, but 694 career win percentage for Nick Sirianni. Sean McDermott doesn't have that, I don't believe. I'm going to pull it up so I can tell you. His is 662. It's close, and it's actually a lot longer sample. You have a 9-year sample. 662 is actually, pretty impressive. But that many years has not made it to a Super Bowl, and I do think we have enough evidence that he is sort of capping his team as opposed to adding to it. I don't think I can say that with Sirianni. Now, I do want to, because I think there's Eagles fans that are listening. They're going, you picked Mike Tomlin from our state ahead of him, and Mike Tomlin hasn't done anything in years, and you picked all these other guys ahead of him, and this is crazy. If we were doing a GM draft, Howie Roseman would be my 101, and I don't think I would have it close. I'd have to think
there's
about
no
that.
other competition.
That's where the Eagles deserve their flowers. They have an incredible front office, and that's what you would want, frankly, is a front office that can make great decisions at acquiring players over and over again. The trades that they're able to make in season and off season for they navigate those veteran trades so well. They give up limited draft pick compensation and bring in contributors. They have so much depth at so many positions. They built out through the lines. Such a smart organization. Want to give them so much credit for that. And so I apologize if you think that we're anti-Philadelphia Eagles because we didn't draft them very high in the Super Bowl draft the other week. And we don't draft Nick Sirianni high here. But that's how I square the circle of Nick Sirianni's results with why he went as late as he did in this draft. Having said that, I do think at a certain point, again, this humility-based drafting thing, I don't think Nick Sirianni's an out-and-out terrible coach, or it would be hard to say that when you look at the stuff like the playoff record and the playoff run last year and how dominant they were in the Super Bowl from a game planning standpoint. Maybe that's not all on him. Maybe that's on other guys in the organization even more than it's on Sirianni, because some of the stuff that he does is super questionable, and it does make you think he's just not very sharp, frankly, at all. It's a really tough one. It's a really, really tough one. I don't have McDermott on my list to answer your question. I do think Sirianni deserves to be on the list.
So I'm going to go the Eagles route in a little more circuitous fashion. And I'm going to say that last year's dominant performance, historic performance from Saquon Barkley, dominant performance from the Philadelphia Eagles offense has to put Kellen Moore into the mix. And I think because he doesn't come out of this Shanahan McVay kind of universe, that he gets knocked down a bit despite results that you might say are equivalent or maybe even better, right? When we look at his tenure with the Dallas Cowboys, 3 out of 4 very good seasons, 2 seasons where they were number 1 in yards. Those 2 seasons, they were both top 5 in points. You have that season I mentioned earlier with the in the Jim Harbaugh discussion with the Chargers that wasn't particularly good, but then you go to the Eagles and you unlock all of these guys. And the Philadelphia offense just seems utterly unstoppable. And you see him not just as a guy who wants to go throw all the time. That was one of the concerns with the Chargers. They wanted to bring some semblance of balance and normalcy back with Jim Harbaugh. And Kellen Moore goes out there and rides Saquon Barkley, understands how you can use your best players, but also, it's not like they weren't unlocking A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith or scoring tons of points. Again, just dominating opponents. And then he makes the interesting choice of allowing himself to be hired by probably the worst organization in football, maybe the worst organization in sports, a team that, in part because of Sean Payton, who I drafted much earlier, have, certainly the worst finances of, I guess I don't know the NHL well enough to say like that there are no other teams that are mismanaging their money
in all of the sports. Yeah.
But it's bad, right? And then they go ahead and in the second round of this recent draft, they say, okay, well, we don't have a QB. Let's draft a 26-year-old player who was not good ever in 7 years of playing college football.
You're on a roll here. I just got to cut in because you're not on social. Are you aware that the current narrative on Tyler Shuck is that they found a guy to build around? Like the Saints beat writers love him, and a ton of NFL analysts think Tyler Shuck is a hit right now. Anyway, I just had to chime in to let you know that. Just to baffle you.
So, again, we're talking about Kellen Moore. Right? We're talking about a guy who dominated as the Dallas offensive coordinator, who dominated as the Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator. Then the New Orleans Saints may have the worst roster in football. They won 4 of their last 5 games. And you somehow have this narrative where you have a franchise QB. Kellen Moore, going to be a superstar. He's going to somehow get himself fired by the Saints so he can go to a real organization and start winning a bunch of Super Bowls.
That's my question for you. You've posed me some good questions. My question is, and this is undoubtedly why I dropped him, and he was my next guy, but undoubtedly why I dropped him at this point. Or I had 2 guys next. He was one of the last 2 before I had a little bit of a tear break here. Undoubtedly, the reason that I pushed him down, and my question for you is, how much did you knock him because of, as you just said, the decision to take the Saints job? He didn't have to take the job.
Yeah, it's a puzzler.
It's
because it's similar to the situation with Mike McDaniel, right? Where like, how do you get out of the situation that was never good in the first place, but you manage to make look good, and then you eventually fail, and it was like, this guy isn't a good coach. It's like, well, because I raised expectations so massively over what they should have been with any other person.
That's right. He's going to elevate expectations, and now Tyler Shuck's going to get found out, and people are going to be like, well, Kellen Moore's didn't develop our franchise quarterback. It's like, no, you never had a franchise quarterback. This is ridiculous. It's a little bit, look, I've always liked Brian Daboll a little bit more than you. It's a little bit like Daboll. Daboll came in 2022 and got a lot of results out of Daniel Jones. Although Daniel Jones has gone on, and Steichen's got some results out of him as well. But we did a lot of Daniel Jones incredulity a little bit ago. We gotta speed round a little bit because I have a thing for one of my kids here in a half an hour. We're 2.5 hours in, but I don't want to just stop. I do have a half an hour to kill, or more like 20 minutes before I got to go. I'm going to actually pull a coordinator up above the last name on this list, which is not fair to that last name. No, I'm just going to take the name. The name that I had was Dave Canales. He belongs here. Bryce Young's a bad quarterback as well. It's everything you just said about Kellen Moore. I don't think Bryce Young is a long-term NFL starter at all. And I think Dave Canales somehow navigated a season and won. It's a very bad division, but won a division with a bad quarterback and a really pretty bad roster by, I think, intelligently building out a run-based offense, and then, some like play action throwing and putting Bryce Young in spots where he could like hit on explosives on key downs, and then you win games narrowly. Their point differential so negative, but the only way they could win was to try to win by like 3 points by hitting on these like key plays and key moments late in games. A couple weeks ago, in an upset win over Tampa, the first time they played Tampa, they had like multiple third down explosives late, and then they were able. They lost to Tampa the second time through, but similar stuff. They had a 4th down late where they hit it on like a 40-yard play to Ted McMillan down inside the 10, and then were able to score to cut it to 2 points. It was reminiscent of the long touchdown to McMillan, or big play to McMillan, long touchdown to Coker maybe in the first Tampa game, which were both on third downs, key plays late. It's like, understanding that stuff we talk about college basketball, the underdogs need to shorten the game and then like shoot a lot of 3-pointers. And that's basically what Dave Canales has done. I think it's good coaching relative to what he's had to work with. It's hard to evaluate in that situation, but he was able to win the division. I think he's a smart enough young coach that he belongs to be selected at some point, and so I'm taking him here.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I guess I was the person picking the Panthers, right? When I picked the Panthers in our Super Bowl draft, it wasn't with the idea that they were necessarily going to just lose all the rest of their games, wouldn't matter, which I do believe is what happened. Then it's a tricky selection for me, but I'm going to, because I do have a number of additional guys that I like here, but I'm going to go ahead and select the actual head coach when Baker Mayfield made Canales and Cohen into things. It doesn't carry the same weight because in 2 of the seasons they actually had losing records. But Todd Bowles has won the NFC South for 4 consecutive seasons. He was the he was the defensive coordinator in their Super Bowl victory over the Kansas City Chiefs. His defense didn't do it quite as comprehensively as the Eagles, but absolutely humiliated Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes in that Super Bowl. I think his leadership is probably understated, including the things like allowing Baker Mayfield to develop as an NFL star. His sideline demeanor is fantastic. He's got the great beard. Todd Bowles, one of my favorite guys in the NFL. I don't know that much about him, but it seems like he's got to be one of the NFL's best people.
He seems awesome. I didn't have him on my list in part because I do think they probably should have. I mean, it would have been a really tough thing, but let him go. Like, there's been a lot of talk about this. They could have let him go and because Cohen didn't want to leave Tampa, the whole thing with the OC, and like promoted Cohen to head coach. And so in my head, I think he's a good coach, Bowles, but in part of my head, I'm like, they made the wrong decision. They probably should have just promoted Liam Cohen. I'm going to go Clint Kubiak as my first offensive coordinator. You get the McShanahan system. You get that scheme. I think working under McDonald, I don't think this stuff's talked about enough. We isolate every person like they're who they are. There was the conversation I saw in the college football playoff. All 4 of the remaining coaches coached under Nick Saban, and they were asking him about it, and multiple of them were saying how much they learned in that 1 year working under Nick Saban. Oregon's Dan Lanning was saying he was going to go work there for free as a graduate assistant because he felt like, it would be like learning so much, and even just in 1 year, even though he was like higher than that at that point in his career, I think, or something. Kurt Cignetti, Indiana's coach, said something about he learned more in that like 1 year than he had learned in the 27 years prior to that, because he coached with them after being a coach for that long. I think Clint Kubiak probably picked up a lot coaching under my number 1 pick, Mike McDonald, in the weekly decisions and talking and stuff. I've given McDonald a lot of credit for what they did offensively, and I think probably true. But I think McDonald talking through scheme with Clint Kubiak every week and everything is going to be very positive for Clint Kubiak at his next stop, assuming that he does go somewhere. I don't know that he will even get a job because they might have a long enough playoff run. It might be kind of a Ben Johnson thing where he gets pushed to the back burner because these teams just hire coaches rather than waiting for the coaches that are doing well in the postseason, which I always think is a little bit odd. That's part of what happened with Kellen Moore last year, by the way, is the Saints were the only team willing to wait around for him. And then he was like, all right, well, I guess I'm coaching the Saints. I don't got any other options. But if Clint Kubiak does get a head coaching job, I do think he could be one of the next good young coaches.
I'm going to go with Brian Flores here. Flores, in his last 2 seasons with the Miami Dolphins, because of all the unpleasantness in how that turned out, I think for me and probably a lot of listeners, you're under the impression that those seasons did not go well. He was 10-6 and 9-8. I mean, those are winning records, right? And his main case was you cannot win with Tua. It's like I was 4 years ahead of you all with that. Signing him to a big contract, benching him in 2025, scapegoating him. I wanted somebody different at the time. It's like I could have won with a lot of QBs. I didn't think I could win with Tua. I'm the best defensive coordinator in the NFL. I'm fiery. It's like, look out when I get my next job. My teams are going to, be similar to these Texans teams. We're going to be scary to play.
Yeah, that's a good one. He was on my list. I'm going to go Kevin Stefanski. Did get fired by the Browns. I think probably a mistake. I don't think he's necessarily done anything all that wrong with the rosters he's been dealt. Seems like he was somewhat involved in the, acquisition of Deshaun Watson and all of those things, but it did kind of get dumped on his lap as well. And he's had a lot to has had a lot of adversity to work with, has not had a lot to work with as far as like talent and some of those things. There's immediately was talk that he's probably going to get another head coaching job this cycle. So we'll see him on another team next year in all likelihood, not certainly. But he's apparently looked at very favorably around the league, and that seems to be the direction we'll head in. And I think he'll probably be a good coach at the next stop.
Well, you mentioned you didn't have Jim Harbaugh on your list because you had John Harbaugh. I'm going to go ahead and take him here. Prior to the disappointing season this year, they went 10-7, 13-4, 12-5. Obviously, you have Lamar Jackson. You have that 14-2 season in 2019 where you don't come through and win it. They've had some bad luck in the playoffs. Again, some of this is facing Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. Some of it is just that you can't control everything, and sometimes you lose. Won the Super Bowl with the Ravens in 2012 with Joe Flacco as the starting QB. Obviously, there was a lot of discussion around that time period of whether or not you could win a Super Bowl with Flacco and how good he was. Now, post Super Bowl with Flacco, the results weren't that good, but the overall results for him in Baltimore have been just absolutely fantastic. So when we're talking about someone who, as a leader, as an organizer, I mean, there's so much management involved in leading an NFL team. The Ravens are going to be a little bit like the Eagles, where we discuss how, their front office is going to rank at the very top, and so much of it goes there. Obviously, this was a disappointing season. They haven't come through with Lamar Jackson. He's getting older, but this is maybe one of those ones again where so many wins and such consistency for such a long time.
Yeah, he was on my list as well and was coming up and probably should have gone by now, I'm sure. His supporters are wondering what the hell he took so long for. Whoever, I don't know if there are supporters of coaches. I'm like looking at this. We've reached the point where we're starting to do some of the coordinators, and it's tough to even know who the best coordinators are in some cases. Some of the hires can come from even non-coordinator positions and lower levels that can be pretty promising ones, or people that elevate quickly. Like Dan Campbell I don't think was ever an OC, or was just briefly. Liam Cohen was an OC for 1 year and then as a head coach. I'm looking at like the Rams have like Mike LaFleur. I mean, I already had like 7 Mikes on my teams, and I almost called Matt LaFleur Mike LaFleur, but he's the OC now under McVay. He's probably a decent choice. I did have Cliff Kingsbury and Lou Anarumo as the last 2 names on my list. I would probably just take one of them, but I'm also at the point, Sean, where I'm saying I'm running out of names, and I'm sure there are OCs or other coordinators out there that I am forgetting about or would be interested in having if I even knew, if I had time to sit and think about all the coordinators, basically. But I'll take Cliff Kingsbury, I guess, if we want to keep going.
Yeah, he's an interesting one. I think my last pick would be Robert Saleh.
Good one.
Had sort of an ignominious conclusion to his tenure with the Jets, but he built the defensive side of the ball, which is what you want to see when you hire a defensive mind. There were some concerns with maybe how he saw the offensive side versus the front office, and that may have led to some things there. Certainly their offense was terrible, but you think about like how massively they collapsed after he left, including on defense. You think about his tenure as a defensive coordinator in the NFL. I think Robert Saleh, one of the great defensive minds, and someone who in a second stint as head coach probably would pretty exciting, commanding presence, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a great one. I'm excited to see him get another opportunity. I think he got a little bit of a bad rap with the Jets. So the final rosters, I had Mike McDonald, Sean McVay, Liam Cohen, Kyle Shanahan, Mike Vrabel, Matt LaFleur, Mike Tomlin, Mike McDaniel. My first 8 picks, 4 Mikes and a Matt. Nick Sirianni, Dave Canales, Clint Kubiak, Kevin Stefanski, Cliff Kingsbury. You had Ben Johnson, Dan Campbell, Kevin O'Connell, Sean Payton, Shane Steichen, Jim Harbaugh, Andy Reid, Demeco Ryans, Kellen Moore, Todd Bowles, Brian Flores, John Harbaugh, Robert Saleh, your last several there, some defensive coaches. You get Bowles, Flores, Harbaugh, he was a special teams coordinator, John Harbaugh, back in the day. Robert Saleh, you had Demeco Ryans. You're starting to build the defense late. Got a lot of good offensive guys early. It was fun talking through this. I got to skedaddle here, got to great grammar there, but this was a blast. We were closer on a lot of it than I mean, maybe it's not surprising to the listeners because we talk every Sunday night together and through the off season and obviously are sharing our thoughts with each other throughout and all of that stuff. But I didn't think we would necessarily have it all as close. There were some that felt like a little bit of a reach for each of us to each other, but fun draft.
Yeah, that was awesome. Hopefully everyone enjoyed. It got me fired up because it made me feel a little bit better about the NFL. It was hard to be excited about some of the play quality across like 2023 to 2025. But then once you dive into it and you think about what these guys are doing, and again, that chess match, the evolutions, all of those types of things, then
there's good coaches.
The NFL is awesome.
It is. We're in pretty good hands here. There are good coaches. We went almost 20 deep at first that we really liked, and then it started to get about when I took Nick Sirianni, it started to get a little sketchy. But there's a lot of good names. You took Kellen Moore after that, and I think Kellen Moore is a really strong pick too. It'll be interesting to see where it goes, and I'm excited to see some of the coordinators that get opportunities. Some of the names that are being floated, like Matt Nagy is being floated as a retread, and like some of those coordinators, I'm a little bit skeptical of. I know there are some defensive coordinators that I can't even think of who necessarily, but we might get some first-time defensive coordinator head coach hires that may be interesting that we probably did not name. But a lot of interesting names. We'll see, like if a Clint Kubiak gets a job or whoever. I like your Flores and Saleh retread names actually for guys that aren't current head coaches, but I like them to get another chance and see what they can do. It should be fun to see who else joins the ranks, but there's more good coaches than bad ones at this point. We're definitely trending upward right now. Scheme is so valuable and important, and there's a lot of people that understand it, I think, favorably right now, and so it's fun. We're also, I think, swinging back around from an era where you really wanted an offensive coach, where it does make some sense to consider defensive coach, because defensive scheme stuff is really important too, and the ones that are able to do it really well and be a leader of men or whatever, you can win that way. I think in the newer NFL that we've just gotten to in the last couple of years, but fun stuff.
Yeah, this was awesome. This is your Stealing Bananas for the wild card week. Good luck in all your playoff contests. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.